The sound of shattering glass cut through the night air like a gunshot, followed by the heavy thud of 250 pounds of muscle hitting the sidewalk outside Murphy's bar. Inside, 70-year-old Eleanor Chen stood calmly brushing dust from her floral cardigan. Her silver hair slightly mussed, but her dark eyes burning with an intensity that made every patron in the establishment take an involuntary step backward, preparing and narrating. This type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Now then, she said in her soft grandmother's voice, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses as she surveyed the room full of stunned faces. Perhaps someone would like to tell me exactly what happened to my granddaughter. The transformation had taken less than 3 seconds. One moment, Eleanor had been the picture of elderly vulnerability, small hunched shoulders, trembling hands. Clutching a worn leather purse, asking politely about her missing granddaughter Lily. The next, she was standing over the unconscious form of Big Mike Torino, the bar's notorious bouncer, who now lay sprawled half in and half out of what used to be the front window. The silence stretched like a taut wire until someone in the back whispered, "Holy shit, did that old lady just..." "Language," Eleanor said mildly, turning toward the voice with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There are ladies present." Detective Ray Martinez pushed through the crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk, his radio crackling with reports of a disturbance at Murphy's. What he found defied every assumption he'd built about little old ladies during his 15 years on the force. Big Mike lay groaning on the pavement, his massive frame folded around a parking meter like a discarded rag doll, while through the jagged hole in the window, Martinez could see a tiny Asian woman straightening her sweater. "Ma'am," Martinez called out, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon before stopping. Something about the woman's posture perfectly balanced, alert without seeming tense, made him reconsider his approach. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside and explain what happened here." Eleanor Chen had been waiting 73 years for someone to mistake Big Mike had just made. Not consciously waiting, of course. She'd built a beautiful life, raised 3 children, buried a beloved husband, and spent the last decade spoiling grandchildren and tending her garden. But the skills she'd learned in another life, in another world, never truly went away. They simply waited, patient as sleeping dragons, for the moment they might be needed again. That moment had arrived when Lily disappeared. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to take a moment to thank you for watching. Creating and narrating these detailed, novel-length stories takes tremendous time and research to bring you the most engaging content possible. We're embarking on a journey of nearly 50,000 words together. That's a full novella. If you're already hooked by what you've heard, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who would enjoy it, and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. This is going to be an epic adventure, so get comfortable, and let's continue with this remarkable tale. 3 days earlier, Eleanor Chen had been kneeling in her backyard garden, her arthritic hands gentle as she transplanted seedlings in the morning sunshine. The small ranch house in suburban Portland looked exactly like what it was, the comfortable home of a retired librarian who made excellent dim sum and never missed her granddaughter's soccer games. Wind chimes sang softly from the porch, and the smell of jasmine tea drifted through the open kitchen window. Grandma Ellie, 20-year-old Lily Chen, burst through the back gate, her Portland State University backpack slung over one shoulder and her black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had Eleanor's sharp intelligence, but her grandfather's height, standing nearly 6 feet tall with the lean build of a marathon runner. "Lily, dear." Eleanor stood slowly, wiping soil from her hands on her gardening apron. "You're early today. Don't you have that economics class on Wednesdays?" "Cancelled." Lily flopped into one of the patio chairs, her usual boundless energy seeming subdued. Professor Hendricks is at some conference. Grandma, can I ask you something? Eleanor settled into the chair across from her, noting the tension in her granddaughter's shoulders. In 73 years, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of distress, whether in her children, her library patrons, or the young woman who'd been the light of her life since the day she was born. Of course. What's troubling you? Lily fidgeted with the straps of her backpack. It's probably nothing, but there's this guy at school, Trevor Hutchins. He's been persistent. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something cold and sharp stirred in her chest. Persistent how? Just showing up places where I am. My coffee shop, the library, even outside my dorm. When I told him I wasn't interested, he laughed and said I'd come around. Lily's voice carried a forced lightness that didn't fool her grandmother for a second. Yesterday he grabbed my arm when I tried to walk away. Left bruises. The pruning shears in Eleanor's lap seemed to grow heavier. She set them aside carefully, buying herself a moment to push down the surge of protective fury that threatened to crack her carefully maintained composure. Did you report this to campus security? I tried. They said unless he actually hurt me or made specific threats, there wasn't much they could do. Apparently following someone around and making them uncomfortable isn't enough. Lily's frustration was evident now, her controlled facade cracking. His dad is some big-shot lawyer who donates to the university. I think that might have something to do with their reluctance to get involved. Eleanor nodded slowly, filing away the information about Trevor Hutchins and his influential father. In her experience, entitled young men who thought their family connections made them untouchable were particularly dangerous when told no. What did your parents say? I haven't told them yet. Lily looked guilty. You know how Dad gets. He'll want to drive down there and confront Trevor himself, and Mom will panic and try to make me transfer schools. I just ... I wanted to handle it myself, you know. I'm 20 years old. I should be able to deal with some creepy guy without running to my parents. Eleanor reached across the small table and took her granddaughter's hand. Lily's fingers were long and elegant, perfect for the piano lessons Eleanor had paid for. But there were indeed finger-shaped bruises on her wrist, purple-black against her pale skin. Independence is admirable, dear one. But there's no shame in accepting help when someone threatens your safety. Eleanor's voice remained gentle, but her grip on Lily's hand tightened slightly. Promise me you'll be careful. Stay in well-lit areas, don't walk alone at night, and trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I promise. Grandma, Lily squeezed back. Thanks for listening without freaking out. You always know what to say. They spent the rest of the afternoon in comfortable conversation, Lily helping with the garden while Eleanor mentally cataloged everything her granddaughter had told her. Trevor Hutchins, wealthy family, lawyer father. Sense of entitlement. Pattern of escalation. All the warning signs Eleanor had learned to recognize in another life, when reading such signs had been a matter of survival. That evening, after Lily had returned to her dorm, Eleanor sat in her study surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a lifetime reader. Books lined every wall, from floor to ceiling, with the overflow stacked in neat piles on every available surface. Most were innocent enough novels, poetry, gardening guides, cookbooks. But hidden behind the complete works of Jane Austen was a small collection that told a different story entirely. Eleanor pulled out a slim volume with Chinese characters on the cover and opened it to a photograph tucked between the pages. The image showed a young woman who might have been Lily's age, dressed in the practical clothes of a 1940s factory worker. But the eyes were unmistakably Eleanor's, sharp, alert, and holding secrets that would have shocked anyone who knew her. Only as the sweet librarian, who made the best mooncakes in the neighborhood, Chun Wei Lin. The photograph's subject had been many things during the war years. Factory worker was just one of them. The truth was buried in classified files and the fading memories of old men who'd taken oaths of silence. But the skills remained, sleeping in muscle memory and neural pathways that time had dulled but never erased. Eleanor closed the book and returned it to its hiding place. She hoped she'd never need those skills again. But if someone threatened Lily, if Trevor Hutchins proved to be more than just an annoyance, well, some things were worth breaking a 50-year silence. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on Friday morning, jolting Eleanor from deep sleep. She grabbed the phone with the quick reflexes of someone who'd spent years expecting emergency calls at all hours. "Grandma?" Lily's voice was small and scared, barely above a whisper. Eleanor was instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "He was outside my dorm again, Trevor, but this time he wasn't alone. He had 2 friends with him, and they were drinking. They were being loud, saying things." Lily's voice cracked slightly. "Horrible things about what they wanted to do to me." "Where are you now?" "My room. My roommate Sarah called campus security, and they finally showed up and made them leave. But Grandma, I'm scared." The way he was looking at me through the window, it wasn't normal. There was something wrong with his eyes. Eleanor was already out of bed, moving with a speed and precision that would have surprised anyone who saw her during daylight hours. "I'm coming to get you. You don't have to pack a bag. Enough for the weekend. I'll be there in 40 minutes. "Grandma, it's the middle of the night, and it's raining. You shouldn't be driving, Lily." Eleanor's voice carried a tone her granddaughter had never heard before, steel wrapped in silk. "Pack your bag. I'll be there soon." The drive to Portland State University took Eleanor through parts of the city she rarely visited anymore. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting the neon signs of late-night establishments and the harsh glare of streetlights. She drove with the confidence of someone who'd navigated far more dangerous territories in far worse conditions. Her small Honda Civic cutting through traffic with surprising agility. The university campus at nearly 3 a.m. was a different world from the bustling academic environment of daylight hours. Security lights cast long shadows between buildings, and the few students out this late moved in quick, purposeful groups. Eleanor parked near Lily's dormitory and texted her arrival. Lily emerged from the building within minutes, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her face pale with exhaustion and stress. She climbed into the passenger seat and immediately leaned against Eleanor's shoulder. "Thank you for coming. Always." Eleanor pulled her granddaughter close for a moment before putting the car in drive. "Tell me exactly what happened." As they drove through the empty streets, Lily recounted the evening's events in more detail. Trevor had shown up outside her dorm around midnight with 2 friends, both large, athletic types who looked like they spent more time in gyms than classrooms. They'd been drinking heavily and making increasingly graphic comments about Lily, loud enough for other students to hear. The worst part was how he acted when security finally came, Lily said, staring out at the rain-streaked window. He went from being this crude, aggressive jerk to this polite, concerned student who was just checking on a friend, like he was 2 different people. Eleanor nodded grimly. She'd known men like that, predators who could switch masks as easily as changing clothes. The charming face they showed to authority figures was often more dangerous than their obvious aggression, because it made them harder to catch and easier to dismiss. "Did security file a report?" "They said they would, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. One of them actually suggested I was overreacting." Lily's voice carried bitter frustration. "They treated it like some college drama instead of ... whatever this is." "This is stalking," Eleanor said firmly. "And it's escalating. The fact that he brought friends suggests he's either trying to intimidate you or he's planning something that requires backup." Lily turned to look at her grandmother with surprise. "That's very ... specific." Eleanor realized she'd revealed more knowledge than a retired librarian should possess. She covered quickly. I read a lot of crime novels. And I've seen enough young women in the library who were dealing with similar situations to recognize the patterns. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had read extensively about predatory behavior, both as research and as a way to understand threats. She'd once been trained to counter. But her real knowledge came from a much darker source. They spent the rest of the drive in comfortable silence, the rain drumming steadily on the roof of the car. Eleanor found herself planning contingencies, running through scenarios and responses with the systematic thoroughness of her old training. If Trevor Hutchins thought he could terrorize her granddaughter, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he could be. Back at the house, Eleanor settled Lily in the guest room that had been hers since childhood, complete with the same pink curtains and stuffed animals she'd loved as a little girl. But as her granddaughter finally fell into exhausted sleep, Eleanor remained awake, sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea and her laptop. Trevor Hutchins proved surprisingly easy to research. Social media profiles showed a young man who projected wealth and confidence, surrounded by friends who seemed to exist primarily to laugh at his jokes and enable his behavior. His father, Richard Hutchins, was indeed a prominent attorney specializing in corporate law, with the kind of political connections that made problems disappear. But Eleanor had learned long ago that everyone had vulnerabilities, everyone had secrets, and everyone had pressure points that could be exploited by someone who knew where to look. She spent the hours until dawn compiling information, building a profile of the Hutchins family that went far beyond their public image. Old habits died hard, and the methodical patience required for intelligence gathering was muscle memory that had never faded. By sunrise, Eleanor Chen had a plan. It wasn't one she wanted to implement. It would require her to become someone she'd buried decades ago. But if that's what it took to protect Lily, then Shun Wei Lin would emerge from her long retirement. Some ghosts, it seemed, were harder to lay to rest than others. Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching Eleanor's mood as she watched Lily pick at her breakfast. Her granddaughter had slept poorly despite being in the safety of the house, and dark circles under her eyes spoke to the toll this situation was taking. "I should go back to campus," Lily said without conviction, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. "I have that study group this afternoon, and I can't let this guy control my life." Eleanor set down her teacup with deliberate care. "Perhaps it would be better to take the weekend to think through your options. There's no shame in strategic retreat." "Strategic retreat?" Lily looked up with a wan smile. "That's not something I'd expect to hear from my grandmother. I may be old, dear, but I'm not naive. Sometimes the wisest course is to step back and reassess before moving forward." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed Lily's hand. "Besides, I enjoy having you here. It's been too quiet in this house." The normalcy of breakfast dishes and gentle conversation was shattered by the sharp ring of Lily's phone. She glanced at the screen and went pale. "It's him, Trevor." Her hand shook slightly as she showed Eleanor the display. "He's been calling and texting since about 6 this morning." Eleanor felt that familiar cold sharpness in her chest, the predator sense that had kept her alive through situations most people couldn't imagine. "What do the messages say?" Lily scrolled through with growing distress. "He's angry that I wasn't at the dorm this morning. He says he needs to talk to me, that I'm being dramatic, that he's just trying to be my friend." She looked up at Eleanor with frightened eyes. "Grandma, how does he know I wasn't there? Has he been watching my room?" The implications sent ice through Eleanor's veins. If Trevor was conducting surveillance on Lily's daily routine, the situation had moved far beyond simple harassment. This was the behavior of someone planning something specific, someone who'd crossed the line from nuisance to genuine threat. "Block his number," Eleanor said firmly. "Right now." "But what if block it?" Eleanor's tone brooked no argument. "If he has something legitimate to say, he can go through proper channels. This behavior is unacceptable." As Lily fumbled with her phone, Eleanor was already formulating plans. She needed more information about Trevor's current location and activities. She needed to understand his support network and resources. Most importantly, she needed to assess whether he was operating alone or as part of a larger group. The old skills were awakening now, shaking off decades of disuse like a wolf emerging from hibernation. Eleanor could feel herself shifting into Oko, a different mode of thinking, systematic, ruthless, focused on threat assessment and response planning. "Done," Lily said, setting her phone aside. "I blocked him on everything I could think of. Good girl." Eleanor stood and began clearing the breakfast dishes, her movements precise and efficient. "Why don't you spend some time in the garden? The fresh air will do you good, and I have some phone calls to make." Once Lily was safely outside, Eleanor retreated to her study and closed the door. The first call was to her son, David, Lily's father, who answered on the second ring with the harried tone of a man juggling weekend family obligations. "Mom, is everything okay? You don't usually call this early on weekends." "David, I need you to listen carefully and not overreact," Eleanor began, then gave him a carefully edited version of Lily's situation. She emphasized the escalating pattern of behavior, while downplaying some of the more alarming details. "No. Need to send him into a panic that might make things worse." David's response was predictably paternal. "I'm driving down there right now. This little punk needs to learn what happens when you threaten a Chen family member." "No." Eleanor's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. "That's exactly what we don't need. Think, David, what happens if you confront him? He calls his lawyer father, claims you threatened him, and suddenly Lily is the one in trouble. These people know how to manipulate the system." There was silence on the other end as her son processed this. David had inherited his father's protective instincts, but also his mother's intelligence. Once she forced him to think past his initial emotional response. "So what do we do?" "We handle this intelligently. I'm going to make some inquiries, see what options we have through proper channels. You and Jennifer keep your schedules clear in case we need you, but let me take the lead on this." After ending the call with David, Eleanor placed a second call to a number she hadn't dialed in over a decade. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Martinez, Ray, it's Eleanor Chen." Detective Ray Martinez had been a rookie patrol officer when Eleanor first met him, 15 years ago, when vandals had targeted the library's Asian cultural display. Over the years, their paths had crossed occasionally. Eleanor was the kind of community member who noticed things and wasn't afraid to speak up when something was wrong. Martinez had learned to pay attention when she called. "Mrs. Chen, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" Eleanor outlined Lily's situation with the clinical precision of someone reporting intelligence to a superior officer. She provided names, dates, specific incidents, and her assessment of escalation patterns. Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "The university cops are right that they can't do much with what you've described," he said when she finished. "But if this kid is conducting surveillance and making threats, that changes things. Can your granddaughter come in and file a formal report?" "She can, but we both know how these things usually go. Rich boy with connected parents against a college student with no proof beyond her word." Martinez sighed. "You're not wrong. But getting it on record is important, especially if things escalate. And Mrs. Chen, be careful. Guys like this, when they feel cornered or thwarted, sometimes they do stupid things." After ending the call, Eleanor sat quietly in her study, surrounded by her books and the comfortable detritus of a normal life. Through the window, she could see Lily kneeling among the tomato plants, gently tying vines to stakes with the patient. Care Eleanor had taught her. Her granddaughter looked young and vulnerable in the morning light, and Eleanor felt the fierce protective love that had driven her decisions for 7 decades. She opened her laptop and began typing, her fingers finding a rhythm they hadn't used in years. There were people she could contact, favors she could call in, resources she could access. but each one would require her to reveal more of who she'd once been, to crack the careful facade she'd built around her retirement. The phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. Lily's number. "Grandma, you need to come outside, right now." Something in her granddaughter's voice made Eleanor move faster than she had in years. She found Lily standing at the edge of the garden, her face white with shock, pointing toward the front of the house. Parked across the street was a black BMW with tinted windows. As Eleanor watched, the driver's side window rolled down just enough to reveal a young man's face, handsome, confident, and wearing a smile that never reached his eyes. Trevor Hutchins had found them. Eleanor felt the last vestiges of her carefully maintained normalcy fall away like a discarded mask. Chen Wei-lin was awake now, fully and completely, and Trevor Hutchins had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. "Go inside," Eleanor told Lily, her voice carrying an authority that made her granddaughter obey without question. "Lock the doors and don't come out until I tell you." As Lily disappeared into the house, Eleanor walked calmly toward the street, her small frame and grandmotherly appearance concealing the dangerous predator that had just been unleashed. She had tried to handle this through normal channels, tried to be the person she'd spent 50 years becoming, but some threats required older, more direct responses. Trevor Hutchins was about to discover that there were worse things in the world than rich boys with anger management issues. He was about to meet one of them. Eleanor approached the black BMW with the unhurried pace of someone taking a morning stroll, her hands clasped behind her back and her expression pleasantly neutral. To any observer, she looked like nothing more than a curious grandmother checking on unusual activity in her quiet neighborhood. Trevor Hutchins rolled his window down completely, his confident smirk faltering slightly as the elderly woman drew closer. This wasn't what he'd expected when he'd tracked down Lily's family address. He'd planned to intimidate, to show the girl that she couldn't hide from him, that his reach extended wherever she might run. "Can I help you, young man?" Eleanor asked, politely, stopping just out of arm's reach of the car. Her voice carried the same gentle tone she'd used with countless library patrons over the years. "Just visiting the neighborhood," Trevor replied, his smile returning as he reassessed the situation. An old lady was no threat, regardless of whose grandmother she might be. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Indeed it is." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, studying him with the intensity of a bird watching a snake. "Though I notice you've been sitting here for quite some time, are you perhaps looking for someone specific?" Trevor's smile widened, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of the predator that lurked beneath his polished exterior. "Maybe I am. You wouldn't happen to know if Lily Chen lives around here, would you?" The question hung in the air between them, a clear threat wrapped in false courtesy. Eleanor felt her pulse slow rather than quicken, the old reflexes kicking in, preparing her body for violence while keeping her mind crystal clear. "Lily is my granddaughter," she said simply. "And you are?" "Trevor Hutchins." He said it like she should recognize the name, like it carried weight that would intimidate her. "Lily and I are friends from school." "I was hoping to surprise her." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this explanation. "How thoughtful of you. Though I'm curious, if you're such good friends, why don't you have her address? And why would you need to surprise her instead of simply calling?" For the first time, Trevor's confidence seemed to waver. He'd expected either fear or easy manipulation from an elderly woman, not polite questions that exposed the flaws in his story. "College kids are hard to pin down," he said, his tone becoming slightly harder. "Always busy with classes and parties and such. Sometimes you have to be persistent to get their attention." Persistence. Eleanor repeated the word with the same tone she might use to discuss the weather. "That's an interesting choice of words. In my experience, when someone needs to be persistent to get another person's attention, it usually means that person isn't interested in giving it." Trevor's mask slipped completely now, revealing the entitled anger that simmered beneath his polished surface. "Look, lady, I don't know what Lily's told you, but she's being dramatic. We're friends. I care about her. Sometimes caring means not taking no for an answer. I see." Eleanor's expression remained pleasant, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle change that made her seem less like a grandmother and more like something far more dangerous. "And in your experience, Mr. Hutchins, how often does that approach work out well for everyone involved?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean that in my 73 years, I've observed that young men who don't accept no as an answer tend to escalate their behavior until someone gets hurt. Usually the young woman they claim to care about." Eleanor took a step closer to the car, and Trevor instinctively pressed back against his seat. "Is that your intention here, Mr. Hutchins? To hurt my granddaughter?" "Of course not." The response came too quickly, too defensive. "I would never hurt Lily. I'm trying to protect her." "Protect her from what?" Trevor fumbled for an answer, clearly not having thought his story through that far. From making bad decisions, from hanging around with the wrong people. She's naive, and there are guys at school who would take advantage of that. Eleanor almost smiled at the irony. "How noble of you. And this protection requires following her, calling her at all hours, and showing up at her dormitory with intoxicated friends?" The color drained from Trevor's face. "She told you about that?" "She tells me everything, Mr. Hutchins. We're very close." Eleanor's voice remained conversational, but there was something beneath it, now a note of steel that made Trevor shift uncomfortably in his seat. "She also showed me the bruises on her wrist where you grabbed her." "That was an accident. I was just trying to get her to listen." "And now you're here, at my home, having somehow obtained my address without my granddaughter's knowledge or consent." Eleanor took another step closer, and Trevor found himself unable to look away from her dark eyes. "Tell me, Mr. Hutchins, what would your father think of this behavior? Richard Hutchins of Hutchins, Walsh and Associates, isn't it? I imagine a man in his position would be quite concerned about his son's activities becoming public knowledge." Trevor's confident facade cracked completely. "How do you know about my father?" Eleanor smiled then, and it was not a grandmother's smile. "I know many things, Mr. Hutchins. For instance, I know that your father's firm is currently under investigation by the State Bar Association for certain irregularities in their billing practices. I know that you've been arrested twice for drunk and disorderly conduct, though the charges were mysteriously dropped both times. I know that you were suspended from your high school for what the administration termed inappropriate behavior toward female students, though your father's donations ensured it never appeared on your permanent record." With each revelation, Trevor seemed to shrink further into his seat. His carefully constructed image of untouchable privilege was crumbling, and Eleanor could see the genuine fear in his eyes now. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want you to leave my granddaughter alone," Eleanor said simply. "Completely and permanently. No more calls, no more following her around campus, no more showing up at her dormitory. If you see her, you will go in the opposite direction. If you're in a class together, you will sit as far away as possible and pretend she doesn't exist. And if I don't?" Eleanor's smile widened, and Trevor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Then you'll discover that some grandmothers are not as helpless as they appear. And you'll learn that there are consequences in this world that your father's money and influence cannot shield you from." She straightened up, brushing imaginary dust from her cardigan. "Drive safely, Mr. Hutchins. The roads can be so dangerous, especially for young men who don't pay attention to where they're going." Trevor fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he started the engine. The BMW pulled away from the curb with more haste than dignity, leaving Eleanor standing calmly on the sidewalk, watching until it disappeared around the corner. Only when she was certain he was gone did she allow herself to acknowledge the adrenaline coursing through her system. It had been decades since she'd needed to project that kind of controlled menace, but the skills were still there, sharp and ready. She turned back toward the house to find Lily watching from the front window, her face pale with confusion and something that might have been awe. Eleanor sighed. There would be questions now, questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. The careful boundaries between Eleanor Chen, the grandmother, and Chun Wei-lin, the operative, were beginning to blur. And she wasn't certain she could maintain the separation much longer. But Lily was safe for now, and that was what mattered. Everything else they would deal with as it came. "Grandma, what just happened out there?" Lily's voice was steady, but Eleanor could hear the undercurrent of confusion and concern. They sat in the living room, morning sunlight streaming through. Lace curtains onto furniture that had been chosen for comfort rather than style. It was Eleanor's favorite room, warm, welcoming, filled with family photos and the accumulated treasures of a long life. But now it felt like a stage set, a carefully constructed facade that was beginning to crack under the weight of secrets too long buried. "I had a conversation with young Mr. Hutchins," Eleanor said carefully, settling into her favorite armchair with the deliberate movements of someone buying time to think. "I believe he understands now that his attention is unwelcome." "Grandma." Lily leaned forward, her dark eyes so like Eleanor's own, fixed on her grandmother's face with uncomfortable intensity. "I watched from the window. I saw the way he reacted to you. That wasn't just some stern grandmother giving a lecture. He was afraid of you, actually afraid." Eleanor busied herself with smoothing her skirt, a delaying tactic that wouldn't fool anyone, least of all a granddaughter who'd inherited the family intelligence. Sometimes bullies back down when they realize their victims aren't as vulnerable as they assumed. That's not what this was. Lily's voice carried a note of certainty that made Eleanor look up sharply. "The way you moved, the way you stood, even the way you spoke to him, it was like watching someone else wearing your face. And how did you know all those things about his father and his arrest record?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Eleanor found herself at a crossroads she'd hoped never to reach. She could maintain the fiction, continue playing the role of the harmless retired librarian. But Lily was intelligent and observant, and the facade was already cracking. More importantly, if Trevor proved to be more dangerous than she'd initially assessed, Lily deserved to know what resources were available to protect her. "What do you know about my life before you were born?" Eleanor asked finally. Lily looked surprised by the change of subject. "You worked as a librarian for 30 years. Before that, you were a factory worker during the war. You met Grandpa when he came back from Korea, got married in 1953, had Dad and Uncle James and Aunt Susan. You've always lived in Portland except for a few years in San Francisco when Dad was little." Eleanor nodded slowly. All true, as far as it went. The perfect cover story, one she'd been living for so long that sometimes she almost believed it herself. "The factory work," she said quietly. "What kind of factory do you think it was?" "I don't know. You never talked about it much. I assumed it was something war-related. Munitions or aircraft parts, maybe." In a manner of speaking. Eleanor rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out at the garden where she'd spent so many peaceful hours. "Lily, there are things about my past that I've never discussed with anyone. Not your grandfather, not your father, not even my closest friends. Things that were classified then and remain sensitive now." She could feel Lily's attention sharpening, could sense her granddaughter's quick mind beginning to process the implications. "The woman who confronted Trevor Hutchins a few minutes ago," Eleanor continued, "that was someone I used to be. Someone I thought I'd buried so deeply that she would never surface again." "Who?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. Eleanor turned back to face her, and for the first time in decades, she allowed some of her carefully constructed mask to fall away. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened. Her expression became more alert, and there was something in her eyes that spoke of experiences far removed from the quiet world of library science. During the war, I wasn't just a factory worker. I was recruited by the Office of Strategic Services, what later became the CIA. My cover was employment at a munitions plant in California, but my real job was different. Lily's eyes widened. You were a spy? Among other things. Eleanor moved back to her chair, but she didn't sit. Instead, she stood behind it, her hands resting on the worn fabric in a way that suggested she was anchoring herself to the present. The OSS needed people who could blend in, who could gather intelligence without drawing attention. Young Asian women were particularly valuable in certain operations, especially those involving Japanese American communities that were under suspicion. My God, Grandma, how is this the first time I'm hearing about this? Because when the war ended, we were all debriefed and sworn to secrecy. Our files were classified, our operations buried, our identities scrubbed from official records. We were told to go back to our normal lives and pretend none of it had ever happened. Eleanor's voice carried a weight of old pain, old decisions that had shaped everything that came after. Most of us were happy to comply. What we'd done, what we'd seen, it wasn't something most people could understand or accept. Lily sank back into the couch, processing this revelation. But you weren't just gathering intelligence, were you? The way you handled Trevor, the way you moved, that wasn't just observation. Skills. Eleanor smiled ruefully. Her granddaughter was indeed too intelligent for comfortable fiction. The OSSE training was comprehensive. We learned languages, codes, surveillance techniques. But we also learned other skills: self-defense, weapons handling, interrogation techniques. And some of us learned more specialized skills than others. How to kill people, Lily. Quietly, efficiently, and without leaving evidence. How to make it look like an accident or natural causes. How to extract information from people who didn't want to give it up. How to disappear completely when a mission went wrong. The silence that followed was profound. Lily stared at her grandmother, the small, gentle woman who had taught her to bake cookies and tend gardens, and tried to reconcile that image with what she'd just learned. Did you ever use those skills? Eleanor's expression was unreadable. Yes, not often, and never without authorization. But yes. Lily was quiet for a long time, her mind racing to process this new understanding of her family history. Finally, she looked up at Eleanor with a mixture of awe and concern. Is that why you're not afraid of Trevor? Because you know you could handle him. Partly. Eleanor finally sat down, suddenly looking every one of her 73 years. But also because I recognize what he is, and I know how to deal with his type. Men like Trevor operate on the assumption that their victims are helpless. Remove that assumption, and they become much less dangerous. What if he doesn't stay away? What if he escalates? Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. Then he'll discover that some problems require permanent solutions. The casual way she said it sent a chill through Lily. This wasn't her gentle grandmother anymore. This was someone else entirely. Someone who had lived through experiences that Lily could barely imagine. Grandma, you can't hurt him. Even if he deserves it. The world is different now. There are laws, consequences. There have always been laws and consequences, dear one. The question is whether you're willing to accept them in exchange for protecting the people you love. Eleanor reached across the space between them and took Lily's hand. But you're right. That should be a last resort. There are other options we should explore first. Such as... Eleanor's smile returned. But it was the predator's smile Lily had glimpsed during the confrontation with Trevor. Such as using the same research skills that allowed me to learn about Trevor's background to find more leverage. Every family has secrets, Lily, even prominent ones. Especially prominent ones. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about evening the playing field. Trevor Hutchins operates from a position of privilege and power. He believes his family's wealth and connections make him untouchable. But everyone is vulnerable to something, and everyone has pressure points that can be exploited by someone who knows where to look. Lily was quiet again, wrestling with the moral implications of what her grandmother was suggesting. Part of her was horrified by the casual way Eleanor discussed blackmail and intimidation. But another part of her, a part that had inherited more than just her grandmother's intelligence, was fascinated by the strategic thinking, the chess-like complexity of it all. What do we do first? The question surprised them both. Lily hadn't intended to make herself part of whatever Eleanor was planning, but the words came out naturally, as if there had never been any question of her involvement. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You said it yourself. This is about protecting family. And I'm tired of being the helpless victim in this situation. If you're going to teach me anything useful, now seems like a good time. Eleanor studied her granddaughter's face, seeing determination where there had been fear, resolve where there had been confusion. It was dangerous to involve Lily in this dangerous and potentially illegal. But it was also an opportunity to teach her skills that might save her life someday, skills that Eleanor had always hoped would never be necessary. Very well, Eleanor said finally, but if we're going to do this, we do it properly. No half measures. No moral qualms once we begin. Are you certain you're ready for that? Lily thought about Trevor's smile, about the way he'd looked at her through her dorm room window, about the bruises on her wrist and the fear that had been eating at her for weeks. She thought about her grandmother's hidden past and the skills that had been sleeping under the surface of their family's quiet suburban life. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. Eleanor nodded once, sharply. Then let's begin your education. But first we need to gather more intelligence on our target. Real intelligence this time, not just what's available through public records. How do we do that? Eleanor's smile turned predatory again. The same way I've been doing it for 70 years, dear one. We go hunting. The Portland Public Library's main branch on Saturday afternoon was a cathedral of quiet activity. Students hunched over laptops, families browsed picture books, and elderly patrons read newspapers in the comfortable chairs near the windows. To any casual observer, Eleanor Chen was simply another retired librarian helping her granddaughter with research, a familiar sight in a place where she'd worked for 3 decades, but the research they were conducting would have shocked anyone. Who knew them? Start with social media, Eleanor murmured, settling into a chair beside Lily at one of the public computers. People reveal more about themselves online than they realize. Look for patterns in his posting, where he goes, who he associates with, what his interests are. Lily's fingers flew over the keyboard with the speed of someone who'd grown up in the digital age. Trevor's Instagram account was public, a testament to his narcissism and need for validation. The images painted a picture of privileged expensive cars, exclusive parties, designer clothes, exotic vacations. Look at this, Lily whispered, pointing to a photo from 3 months ago. It showed Trevor and several friends at what appeared to be a high-end bar, their table littered with empty bottles and the kind of casual drug paraphernalia that suggested wealth provided immunity from consequences. Eleanor leaned closer, her trained eye cataloging details most people would miss. The location tag says Morrison's, that's downtown, near the courthouse. Expensive place, attracts a certain clientele. And look at the time stamped 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. These aren't college students blowing off steam. This is something else. What do you mean? I mean that most college students don't have the money or connections to party at Morrison's until dawn on a school night. This suggests Trevor's social circle extends beyond university. Eleanor pointed to one of the other young men in the photo. That's Marcus Petrov. His father owns half the shipping interests on the Columbia River. And the blonde girl in the back? That's Sarah Whitmore, daughter of the federal judge. Lily stared at her grandmother with renewed amazement. How do you know all these people? Portland's power structure isn't that large, and I've been observing it for decades. When you work in public service, you learn to recognize the names and faces that shape policy and influence decisions. Eleanor scrolled through more photos, her expression growing increasingly grim. This is worse than I thought, Lily. Trevor isn't just some entitled college boy with boundary issues. He's connected to serious wealth and political power. Is that bad for us? It means we need to be more careful. But it also means there's more at stake for him and his family if this becomes public. People like this don't just have secrets. They have secrets that could destroy careers and reputations if they came to light. Eleanor opened a new browser window and began typing with the methodical precision of someone who'd conducted countless intelligence operations. She accessed databases that most civilians didn't know existed, used search techniques that bypassed standard privacy protections, and followed digital trails with the patience of a hunter tracking prey. Property records, she explained as columns of data filled the screen. The Hutchins family owns more real estate than their tax filings suggest. Look at this: properties held through shell companies, offshore accounts, suspicious transfer patterns. Either they're evading taxes or they're laundering money for someone else. Lily watched in fascination as her grandmother navigated through layers of corporate obfuscation with ease. Where did you learn to do this? Intelligence work is 90% research and 10% action. The skills transfer. Eleanor paused at a particularly interesting entry. Here we go. Richard Hutchins recently purchased a warehouse in Northwest Portland through a company that doesn't appear to have any legitimate business purpose. The timing coincides with some irregularities in his firm's client trust accounts. What does that mean? It means Richard Hutchins may be in more legal trouble. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, weighing options and calculating risks with the systematic thoroughness that had kept her alive through missions most people couldn't imagine. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of command. We're going to attend a party. What? Tonight is Saturday night. According to his social media patterns, Trevor and his friends will be at Morrison's or one of the other upscale establishments they frequent. We're going to observe them in their natural habitat, gather intelligence on their behavior patterns and social dynamics. Lily stared at her grandmother in disbelief. Grandma, you're 73 years old. You can't just show up at some trendy bar and start spying on college students. Eleanor's smile was mysterious. You'd be surprised what a well-dressed older woman can accomplish in the right setting, especially when she has a believable cover story and the right attitude. What kind of cover story? You're going to help me with that. Tell me, what does a wealthy grandmother from Lake Oswego look like when she's taking her granddaughter out for a sophisticated evening in the city? Understanding dawned on Lily's face. You want to go undercover? I want us to go undercover. This is part of your education, remember? You wanted to learn how to protect yourself, how to stop being the victim. Well, the first lesson is that information is the most powerful weapon you can have. Lily felt a thrill of excitement mixed with terror. The rational part of her mind knew this was insane, a 73-year-old woman and her college-aged granddaughter playing spy games with potentially dangerous people. But another part of her, a part that had been awakening since she'd watched Eleanor confront Trevor that morning, was eager to learn these skills, to become someone who couldn't be intimidated or victimized. What if something goes wrong? Eleanor's expression grew serious. That's why we do this properly. We establish escape routes, communication protocols, and contingency plans. We never take unnecessary risks, and we always have multiple exit strategies. She reached over and squeezed Lily's hand. And we remember that the goal is intelligence gathering, not confrontation. We watch, we learn, and we leave before anyone realizes we were there. And then we use what we learn to ensure that Trevor Hutchins never bothers you again. Eleanor's voice carried a note of finality that made Lily shiver. One way or another, As they left the library, Lily found herself looking at her grandmother with new eyes. Eleanor Chen, the retired librarian, was gone, replaced by someone far more complex and dangerous. It should have been frightening, but instead, Lily felt safer than she had in weeks. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't the helpless victim. She was part of something larger, something that had the power to fight back. Tonight, she would learn what that felt like. We're deep into this incredible story now, and I hope you're as captivated as I am by these unfolding events. The amount of effort that goes into researching, writing, and narrating these novel-length stories is immense. We're talking about creating content equivalent to a published book. But it's worth it to bring you stories that truly engage and transport you to another world. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please take a second to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate great storytelling. Your support means everything and helps us continue creating these detailed, epic narratives. We still have so much more to discover together, so let's see how this situation unfolds. Eleanor stood before her bedroom mirror at 7 o'clock that evening, transforming herself with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd assumed dozens of identities over the years. The woman reflected back at her bore little resemblance to the grandmother who'd been tending her garden that morning. Her silver hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, held in place with vintage pearl pins that suggested old money rather than librarian's pension. The black cocktail dress she'd chosen was classic rather than fashionable, the kind of timeless piece that wealthy women bought once and wore for decades. A string of cultured pearls, her grandmother's wedding ring moved to her right hand, and a vintage Cartier watch that had been a retirement gift completed the ensemble. But it was the transformation in bearing that would have fooled anyone who thought they knew Eleanor Chen. She stood straighter, moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to deference, and had somehow acquired the indefinable air of authority that money and breeding provided. "You look." Lily paused in the doorway, searching for words. "You look like someone completely different." "That's the point, dear one." Eleanor turned from the mirror, and even her voice had changed, the accent subtly refined, the tone carrying the unconscious authority of someone who'd never doubted their place in the world. Identity is largely a matter of expectation. People see what they expect to see and ignore what doesn't fit their preconceptions. Lily herself had undergone a similar transformation. Her usual jeans and casual tops had been replaced by a sophisticated black dress Eleanor had produced from some hidden corner of her closet. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and understated jewelry completed the look of a young woman comfortable in expensive surroundings. "Remember," Eleanor said as they prepared to leave, "we're Catherine and Elizabeth Worthington from Lake Oswego. Catherine is a widow who made her fortune in commercial real estate. Elizabeth is a sophomore at Reed College, studying art history. We're celebrating Elizabeth's birthday with dinner and drinks in the city. Got it? But Grandma Catherine, what if someone recognizes you? You worked in Portland for 30 years. Eleanor's smile was coldly amused. "People see what they expect to see, Elizabeth. No one expects a retired librarian to be dining at Morrison's on a Saturday night, so they won't see one." The drive downtown took them through a Portland that looked different in the evening light. Streetlights reflected off rain-slicked pavement, and the city's trendy districts pulsed with weekend energy. Morrison's was located in the Pearl District, occupying the ground floor of a converted warehouse that now housed luxury condominiums and high-end boutiques. Eleanor pulled her Honda into the valet parking area with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether they belonged there. The young man who took her keys barely glanced at the modest vehicle. In Portland's quirky social hierarchy, understated transportation was often a sign of genuine wealth rather than its absence. Morrison's interior was a study in modern industrial. Chic exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and carefully curated vintage lighting that provided ambiance without sacrificing the ability to see and be seen. The clientele was exactly what Eleanor had expected, a mix of young professionals, trust fund recipients, and social climbers who wanted to be around wealth even if they didn't possess it themselves. "Table for two," Eleanor told the hostess with the casual authority of someone accustomed to getting what they wanted, preferably somewhere with a view of the bar area. They were seated at a prime table near the windows, with clear sightlines to both the main bar and the VIP section that catered to Morrison's more exclusive clientele. Eleanor ordered wine with the kind of specific knowledge that suggested genuine expertise, while Lily marveled at how completely her grandmother had disappeared into this new persona. "There," Eleanor murmured after their wine arrived, nodding. Slightly toward the bar, Trevor and his friends just arrived. Lily followed her gaze and spotted Trevor immediately. He moved through the crowd with the arrogant confidence she remembered, but seeing him in his natural habitat was different. Somehow, here, surrounded by his social circle, his predatory nature was more obvious. The way he touched women without invitation, the casual dismissal of service staff, the assumption that his presence was welcome everywhere. The tall blonde with him is Cassandra Morrison, yes, as in Morrison's. Her family owns this place among other things. The older man they're talking to is Judge Whitmore, Sarah's father. And the woman in the red dress. Eleanor paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "I don't recognize her, but from the way everyone's deferring to her, she's important." Lily studied the group with growing unease. They look like they own the world. In many ways they do. Or at least their families do. Eleanor sipped her wine, watching the interaction at the bar with the focused attention of a predator studying prey. But watch their body language, the power dynamics. Trevor isn't the leader of this group, he's trying to impress them. That suggests he's not as secure in his position as he wants everyone to believe. As they watched, the group moved to a private section of the bar that was separated from the main. The waitress, clearly hoping for a generous tip from the well-dressed older woman, leaned in conspiratorially. "That's Victoria Carrington. She's some kind of art dealer or gallery owner. Very exclusive clientele, if you know what I mean. She comes in here most Saturday nights with different groups." "How interesting. Thank you, dear." After the waitress left, Eleanor's expression had grown thoughtful. Victoria Carrington. "I need to research that name." "Why? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, necessarily. But art dealing can be a front for other activities, money laundering, theft, smuggling. And the fact that she associates with this particular group suggests her business might not be entirely legitimate." Before Lily could respond, their attention was drawn back to the VIP section by a commotion. Trevor's voice had risen above the ambient noise, and his gestures were becoming increasingly animated. Even at a distance, it was clear he was agitated about something. "Can you hear what he's saying?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly, and Lily was amazed to realize her grandmother was somehow able to pick individual conversations out of the restaurants. Background noise. "He's angry about this morning. He's telling them about our conversation, but he's embellishing the story to make himself look less vulnerable. What's he saying? That I threatened him. That I somehow knew things about his family that I shouldn't have access to. He's suggesting that you and I are working with someone to dig up dirt on his father." Eleanor's expression grew grim. "That's not good. Why? Because now they're going to investigate us. And while my cover identity will hold up to casual scrutiny, it won't survive the kind of resources these people have access to." As if summoned by Eleanor's concern, Victoria Carrington looked up from the group and let her gaze sweep the restaurant. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, her eyes met Eleanor's across the crowded room. There was recognition there, not of Eleanor specifically, but of something familiar, something that didn't quite fit the cover story she was projecting. We need to leave, Eleanor said quietly, already reaching for her purse. Now. What happened? The woman in red. She's not just an art dealer. Eleanor's voice was tight with controlled urgency. She's something else entirely, and she's recognized that I'm not what I appear to be. They rose from their table with unhurried grace, Eleanor leaving cash on the table that was generous but not memorable. As they made their way toward the exit, Lily could feel eyes following them, could sense the shift in attention that meant their surveillance had been detected. "Don't look back," Eleanor murmured as they reached the door. "Don't hurry. We're simply two women finishing our evening out." But as they waited for the valet to retrieve their car, Lily caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. Victoria Carrington had left the VIP section and was moving toward the exit with purpose. "She's coming," Lily whispered. Eleanor's hand moved to her purse, and Lily suddenly realized that whatever her grandmother carried for protection, it wasn't pepper spray. "Excuse me," Victoria's voice was cultured, with a slight accent that might have been European. "I couldn't help but notice you from across the room. You look so familiar. Have we met before?" Eleanor turned with a polite smile that never wavered. "I don't believe so. Though I suppose Portland's social circles are smaller than we sometimes realize." Victoria's eyes were sharp, calculating. "Yes, they are indeed. Particularly when one moves in certain, specialized circles." The words carried weight, implications that hung in the air between them. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "Of course not." Victoria's smile was predatory. "Well, it was lovely to see you." "I do. Hope we'll run into each other again soon." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. As their car arrived and they drove away, Lily could see Victoria in the side mirror, standing under the restaurant's entrance lights and watching their departure with the intensity of a hunter marking prey. "We're in trouble, aren't we?" Lily asked once they were several blocks away. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies with the systematic thoroughness of her old training. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm afraid we are." The call came at 3:47 a.m., jolting Eleanor from uneasy sleep. She answered on the first ring, instantly alert with the reflexes of someone who'd spent years expecting emergency contact at all hours. "Eleanor Chen?" The voice was female, unfamiliar, and carried the kind of professional neutrality that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Yes, my name is Victoria Carrington. I believe we met briefly this evening at Morrison's." Eleanor sat up in bed, her mind racing. Victoria calling in the middle of the night wasn't social courtesy, it was psychological warfare, designed to demonstrate that she could reach Eleanor anytime, anywhere. "Yes, I remember. Though I must say, this is rather late for a social call." Victoria's laugh was cold. "Oh, this isn't social at all. I'm calling because I'm curious about you, Mrs. Chen. You see, I have a very particular set of skills when it comes to reading people, and there was something about you tonight that didn't quite fit." Eleanor kept her voice steady, but her free hand was already moving toward the drawer where she kept certain items that most retired librarians had no use for. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. The way you moved, the way you observed the room, the subtle changes in your posture when you felt threatened. These aren't behaviors one typically associates with retired librarians." Victoria's voice carried amusement now, as if she was enjoying the verbal sparring. "I did some research after you left. Catherine Worthington of Lake Oswego doesn't exist." The silence stretched between them, filled with implications. Eleanor felt the familiar calm settling over her, the predatory focus that had kept her alive through situations most people couldn't survive. "And who exactly are you, Miss Carrington? Because I'm quite certain that art dealing isn't your primary profession." "Either." "Very good. You're right, of course. Art is merely a convenient cover for other activities, as I suspect your domestic retirement has been a cover for you." Victoria's tone became more serious. The question is whether we're going to be friends or enemies. That depends entirely on what you want. I want to know why you're interested in Trevor Hutchins and his family. More specifically, I want to know why someone with your particular background is taking a personal interest in a spoiled college boy. Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities. Victoria clearly had resources and knowledge that went far beyond what a civilian should possess. The way she'd identified Eleanor's cover identity so quickly suggested access to intelligence databases that were supposed to be secure. Trevor has been bothering my granddaughter. I wanted to discourage his attention by conducting surveillance. At Morrison's? That seems rather excessive for a simple harassment situation. Victoria's voice carried skeptical amusement. Unless, of course, your granddaughter means more to you than normal family affection would account for. Or unless you know something about Trevor that makes him more dangerous than he appears. Eleanor realized she was dealing with someone who understood the psychology of motivation and threat assessment. Victoria wasn't just fishing for information. She was conducting a professional interrogation, using techniques that suggested formal training. What's your interest in this situation, Miss Carrington? Trevor and his friends are business associates of mine. Their families provide certain services that are valuable to my operations. I can't afford to have them destabilized by outside interference. The implication was clear. Victoria's art dealing was a front for something that required money laundering, political protection, and the kind of influence that wealthy families could provide. Eleanor was threatening that network by targeting Trevor. I see. And if I were to cease my interest in young Mr. Hutchins, then we could part as strangers who happened to cross paths briefly. Your granddaughter would be left alone, and you could return to your comfortable retirement. Victoria's voice hardened. But if you continue to interfere with my business interests, then you'll discover that retirement doesn't provide as much protection as you might think. And your granddaughter will learn that some dangers are far worse than lovesick college boys. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Eleanor felt the last vestiges of her peaceful civilian life falling away, replaced by the cold calculation that had once made her one of the most effective operatives in the Pacific Theater. Miss Carrington, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. Eleanor's voice carried a note of authority that made Victoria pause. I spent 30 years building a quiet life in this city. I raised a family, contributed to my community, and tried to forget the things I once had to do in service of my country. I was very happy to leave that life behind. And now you've made that impossible. By threatening my granddaughter, you've awakened something that has been sleeping for 50 years. Something that your art-dealing friends and their spoiled children are not equipped to handle. Victoria's laugh was genuinely amused now. You're threatening me? A 73-year-old librarian is threatening me? I'm not threatening you, Miss Carrington. I'm educating you. Chun Wei-Lin wasn't just any operative. I was the woman they sent when other operatives failed. I was the woman they called when someone needed to disappear permanently and without a trace. The silence on the other end of the line stretched longer this time. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had lost its mocking tone. Wei-Lin died in 1953. Her file is sealed. Her file is sealed because she never existed officially. But she's very much alive, and she's running out of patience with people who threaten her family. Eleanor could hear Victoria's breathing change, could sense the recalculation happening on the other end of the line. Victoria was clearly someone with access to intelligence resources, someone who understood exactly what Eleanor was claiming to be. You're serious. Completely. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to call off Trevor Hutchins. You're going to ensure that he never bothers my granddaughter again. You're going to pretend this conversation never happened, and you're going to forget that Eleanor Chen exists. And if I don't? Eleanor's smile was invisible but audible. Then you'll discover why Chen Wei-lin's file is sealed. And why some of the most dangerous people in the world spent 40 years looking over their shoulders, wondering if she was still alive. The line went dead. Eleanor sat in the darkness for a long time, her mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. She'd revealed more than she'd intended, escalated a situation that might have been contained. But Victoria Carrington had made a fundamental mistake. She'd threatened family. In the bedroom down the hall, Lily slept peacefully, unaware that her grandmother had just declared war on people who made their living from violence and corruption. Eleanor hoped it wouldn't come to actual conflict. She'd meant what she'd said about being happy to leave her old life behind, but if Victoria forced her hand, if Trevor and his associates proved too dangerous to handle through conventional means, well, some skills never really went away. They just waited in the darkness, patient and deadly, for the moment they might be needed again. That moment was approaching faster than Eleanor had hoped. Sunday morning dawned gray and threatening, matching Eleanor's mood as she sat in her kitchen with 3 phones arranged on the table before her. Her regular cell phone, a burner phone she'd acquired from sources that no longer officially existed, and the landline that connected her to a world she'd tried to leave behind. Lily had left early for a study group, unaware of the 3 a.m. phone call that had changed everything. Eleanor preferred it that way for now. The fewer people who knew how dangerous their situation had become, the better. The first call was to Detective Martinez. "Ray, it's Eleanor Chen. I need to ask you about someone, quietly." Martinez's voice carried the wariness of a cop who'd learned to pay attention when civilians asked about quiet inquiries. "What's going on, Mrs. Chen?" "A woman named Victoria Carrington. Claims to be an art dealer, but I suspect she's involved in something more serious. I need to know if she's on anyone's radar." There was a pause while Martinez considered this request. "This related to your granddaughter's situation?" "Possibly. I encountered her last night, and she seemed professionally interested in my family. Give me a few hours. I'll make some calls." The second call was more difficult. Eleanor dialed a number she hadn't used in over a decade, one that might not even be active anymore. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Who is this?" "Marcus, it's Wei-lin." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Eleanor began to wonder if the line had gone dead. Finally, Marcus Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, spoke in a voice that carried the weight of old memories and older secrets. "Jesus Christ. I thought you were dead. I've been retired, deeply retired. But something's come up that requires consultation. This line secure?" Eleanor glanced at the burner phone specifications. Military-grade encryption, purchased through channels that still owed her favors. Secure enough. What do you need? Information on a woman named Victoria Carrington. Claims to be an art dealer, but she's got access to intelligence resources. And she's threatening my family. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor could hear him typing in the background. Carrington ... shit. Wei-lin, you need to be very careful with this one. Talk to me. Victoria Carrington is connected to an organization we've been tracking for about 15 years. International art smuggling on the surface. But they deal in everything. Information. People. She's not just muscle, she's management. Level. Very dangerous, very well connected. Eleanor felt ice forming in her chest. What's her operational profile? Former MI6, went private about 20 years ago. Specializes in infiltration and long-term operations. If she's in Portland, it's not for the art scene. Marcus paused. Wei-lin, whatever you stumbled into, you need to extract yourself and your family immediately. These people don't negotiate, they eliminate problems. It's too late for extraction. She's already made contact, already issued threats. I need options. The only option is to disappear. New identities, relocation, the full package. I can make some calls. No, Eleanor's voice carried finality. "I'm 73 years old, Marcus. I'm not running anymore. If she wants a war, she'd get one. Wei Lin, you've been out of the game for 50 years. These people have resources you can't imagine. Military-grade weaponry, international connections, political protection at the positive highest levels. And I have something they don't. What's that?" Eleanor's smile was invisible but deadly. Nothing left to lose. After ending the call with Marcus, Eleanor sat quietly for several minutes, processing what she'd learned. Victoria Carrington wasn't just a criminal, she was a professional. Someone with the same training and experience Eleanor possessed. Difference was that Victoria was still active, still connected to modern resources and support networks. But Eleanor had advantages too. This was her city, her territory. She knew every street, every building, every potential safe house and escape route. More importantly, Victoria and her organization had no idea what they were dealing with. They saw a retired librarian, not the ghost of a woman who'd once been considered too dangerous for official records. The third phone call was the most difficult of all. Eleanor dialed her son's number with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. "Dad?" David answered on the second ring, and Eleanor could hear the sounds of Sunday morning family life in the background, cartoons playing, children laughing, the comfortable chaos of suburban normalcy. "David, I need you and Jennifer to take the children somewhere for a few days. A vacation, perhaps. Somewhere out of state." "Mom, what's going on? You sound strange." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "There's been a development in Lily's situation. It's become more serious than we initially thought. As a precaution, I think it would be wise for the family to be elsewhere. For a short time." "How serious? Mom, you're scaring me." "Serious. Enough that I'm asking you to trust me and not ask questions. Take your family somewhere safe, David. Somewhere that can't be easily traced to our family connections. And don't contact me unless it's an absolute emergency." The silence on the other end was heavy with unspoken questions. David had inherited enough of his mother's intelligence to read between the lines, to understand that she was telling him to disappear without explaining why. "How long?" "A week, perhaps 2. I'll contact you when it's safe to return." "And Lily?" Eleanor's voice softened slightly. "Lily will be with me. She'll be safe, I promise you that." After ending the call, Eleanor sat in the growing silence of her house and felt the weight of decisions made and bridges burned. There would be no going back now. The quiet retirement she'd built so carefully was gone, replaced by the stark reality of a conflict she'd hoped never to face again. She opened the burner phone and sent a single text message to a number that existed only in encrypted memory. "Wei Lin is active. Require full support package. Authorization, Nightingale 7. The response came within minutes. "Package authorized. Delivery in 6 hours. Good hunting." Eleanor smiled grimly. Some organizations never really died. They just went dormant, waiting for the moment they might be needed again. In 6 hours, she would have access to resources that Victoria Carrington couldn't imagine. Tools and weapons that officially didn't exist. But first, she needed to collect Lily and explain that their situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. The study group at Portland State was meeting in the library's main reading room. A dozen students hunched over textbooks and laptops in the focused concentration that marked midterm season. Eleanor found Lily easily enough. She was the only one who looked up when the elderly woman entered, recognizing something different about her grandmother's bearing. "I need to speak with you," Eleanor said quietly. "It's urgent." Lily gathered her things without question, making excuses to her study partners about a family emergency. They walked in silence until they reached Eleanor's car, and only then did Lily speak. "Something's happened, hasn't it?" "Yes, the woman from last night, Victoria Carrington, called me early this morning. The situation has escalated beyond what I initially expected. As they drove back toward the house, Eleanor explained the phone call in broad strokes, leaving out the more specific details about Victoria's organization and her own past. But Lily was intelligent enough to read the implications. She threatened you. Threatened us. Yes, and I responded in kind. Which means we're now in a state of active conflict with people who are significantly more dangerous than Trevor Hutchins. Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the circumstances. What do we do? Eleanor glanced at her granddaughter, seeing determination where she'd expected fear, resolve, where she'd anticipated panic. Lily was indeed her granddaughter in more ways than simple genetics. We prepare for war. The word hung in the air between them as they pulled into Eleanor's driveway. The house looked the same as always, tidy, welcoming, the picture of suburban normalcy. But Eleanor could already see it with tactical eyes, assessing approaches and defensive positions, escape routes, and potential vulnerabilities. Inside, she led Lily to the study and closed the door. From behind the complete works of Jane Austen, she retrieved not just the hidden photograph, but a small leather journal that had been sealed away for 50 years. What's that? Insurance, Eleanor said simply. The names and locations of people who owe me favors. Resources that can be activated in extreme circumstances. She looked up at Lily with deadly seriousness. Some of these people are very dangerous. Dear one, the kind of dangerous that governments use to solve problems that can't be addressed through conventional means. Lily stared at the journal with a mixture of fascination and terror. You're really going to call them? If Victoria forces. My hand, yes. But first, we try to resolve this through more civilized means. Eleanor moved to her computer and began typing with rapid precision. I'm going to make some inquiries about Victoria's business operations. If she's using Portland as a base for her illegal activities, there are people who would be very interested to know about it. What kind of illegal activities? Art smuggling is often a front for other forms of smuggling, weapons, drugs, money. If Victoria's organization is moving contraband through Portland's port facilities, they're operating in someone else's territory, someone who might not appreciate the competition. Eleanor's fingers flew over the keyboard, accessing databases and communication networks that existed in the shadows between legitimate business and organized crime. She was walking a dangerous line, making contact with people who remembered Wei Lin and the favors she'd once been owed. There, she said finally, leaning back from the computer. I've put out inquiries with several interested parties. If Victoria Carrington is operating illegally in Portland, we'll know within hours. And if she is ... then what? Eleanor's smile was predatory. Then she discovered that Portland has a very active and territorial criminal underground. One that doesn't appreciate outsiders moving in without permission. A soft chime from the burner phone interrupted her thoughts. A text message. Package delivery in 2 hours. Recommend immediate relocation to secondary site. Eleanor showed the message. To Lily, it's time to go. Pack light clothes for a few days, nothing sentimental, nothing that can be traced. Where are we going? Somewhere safer than here. Somewhere we can plan our next moves without worrying about surveillance or attack. Eleanor was already moving toward her bedroom, her actions swift and efficient. The woman who called me last. Knight is a professional killer, Lily. She won't hesitate to eliminate threats to her operation. We need to be somewhere she can't find us. As they packed, Eleanor felt the familiar pre-combat calm settling over her. Her mind was clear, focused, calculating probabilities and contingencies with the mechanical precision of her old training. It had been 50 years since she'd needed these skills, but they were still there, sharp and ready. Victoria Carrington had made a fundamental error in judgment. She'd assumed that Eleanor Chen was just another civilian, someone who could be intimidated or eliminated without consequences. She'd forgotten that in the shadow world of intelligence and covert operations, retirement was often just another form of cover. In less than 6 hours, Victoria would discover her mistake. And by then, it would be far too late to correct it. Eleanor Chen, the librarian, was gone forever. Wei Lin was back, and she was very, very angry. The warehouse sat in an industrial district of southeast Portland, surrounded by the kind of businesses that minded their own affairs and asked no questions about unusual activities. Eleanor pulled her Honda into a bay marked Chen Import-Export, a company that existed only on paper but had maintained this facility for 50 years. "Grandma," Lily said as they approached the nondescript steel door, "how long have you had this place?" "Since 1954, Eleanor replied, producing a key that looked older than Lily herself. "Some preparations you hope you'll never need, but you make them anyway." The interior of the warehouse was not what Lily had expected. The main floor was filled with crates and shipping containers that appeared legitimate, but Eleanor led her to a concealed elevator that descended to a basement level that officially didn't exist. When the doors opened, Lily found herself in what could only be described as a command center. Communications equipment lined one wall, from modern computers to radio systems that looked like they belonged in a museum. A gun safe occupied another corner, and maps of Portland and the surrounding region covered every available surface. But most impressive was the medical station, a fully equipped surgical suite that could have served a small hospital. "My God," Lily whispered. "How long have you been planning for this?" "I haven't been planning for this specifically," Eleanor said, moving to the communication station with familiar ease. "But I've been planning for something like this since the day I retired. Old habits, you might say." Eleanor activated several systems with quick, practiced movements. Screens came to life, showing camera feeds from around the warehouse and the surrounding streets. Radio chatter filled the air as she monitored police frequencies, Port Authority communications, and several encrypted channels that Lily couldn't identify. "The package I mentioned should arrive within the hour," Eleanor explained as she worked. "Equipment and support materials that will give us significant advantages over Victoria's organization." "What kind of equipment?" Eleanor's smile was grim. "The kind that makes problems disappear permanently." Before Lily could ask for clarification, one of the monitors chimed with an incoming message. Eleanor read it quickly, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "What is it?" "Victoria's been busy since our phone call. 3 of my old contacts have been approached by people offering money for information about Chen Wei Lin. They're casting a wide net, trying to map my connections and resources." Lily felt a chill of fear. "Is that bad?" "It's expected, but concerning. It means Victoria is taking our conflict seriously enough to invest significant resources in intelligence gathering. She's not treating this as a simple intimidation operation anymore." Another monitor activated, showing the warehouse's street-level camera feeds. A black van had pulled into the alley, and 2 men in coveralls were unloading equipment cases with the efficient movements of professionals. "Our package has arrived," Eleanor said, moving toward the elevator. "Stay here and monitor the communications. If you see anything unusual on the camera feeds, alert me immediately." Eleanor returned 20 minutes later with 3 large cases that she set on the central table with the careful reverence of someone handling dangerous tools. The first case contained weapons, not sporting rifles or hunting pistols, but military-grade equipment designed for close-quarters combat and precision elimination. The second case held electronic surveillance devices, communication equipment, and what appeared to be several different sets of false identification documents. The third case was the most disturbing. Medical supplies, but not the kind found in normal first aid kits. Surgical instruments, anesthetics, and other materials that suggested someone might need to perform procedures that weren't exactly healing in nature. "Grandma," Lily said slowly, "what exactly did you do during the war?" Eleanor paused in her inspection of the equipment, considering how much truth her granddaughter was ready to handle. I eliminated threats to American interests in the Pacific. Theater. Sometimes those threats were enemy agents. Sometimes they were collaborators. Sometimes they were people who simply knew too much about classified operations. You were an assassin, among other things. I was whatever my country needed me to be. Eleanor's voice carried no emotion, no pride or shame, just a flat statement of fact. The world was different then, Lily. Simpler in some ways, more complex in others. We did what was necessary to ensure that democracy survived. Lily stared at the weapons and equipment spread across the table. And you think it's necessary now? I think Victoria Carrington and her organization represent the same kind of threat that I was trained to eliminate. They prey on the innocent, corrupt legitimate institutions, and operate outside the law with impunity. Eleanor met her granddaughter's eyes steadily. The only difference is that now, instead of protecting American interests, I'm protecting my family. A new alarm chimed, drawing their attention to the monitors. Detective Martinez was shown on one of the camera feeds, standing at the warehouse's main entrance and looking around with the careful attention of a cop who'd noticed something unusual. "He's early," Eleanor muttered, pressing the button that released the front door locks. "I called him earlier and asked him to meet us here, but not for another hour." Martinez entered the basement level cautiously, his hand resting on his service weapon as he took in the command center and its equipment. His expression was a mixture of amazement and concern. Double quotes, "Mrs. Chen, what the hell is all this?" "Insurance, detective. The same kind of insurance that kept this city safe for 30 years while I was retired." Eleanor gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit down, we need to talk." Martinez remained standing, his cop instincts clearly screaming warnings about the situation he'd walked into. "I did the research you asked for on Victoria Carrington. What I found? Jesus, Mrs. Chen, this woman is connected to some very bad people. Tell me, international art smuggling is just the tip of the iceberg. The FBI has been tracking her organization for years, but they can never make anything stick. Money laundering, weapons trafficking, human trafficking, they're into everything. And they have political protection at levels that make prosecution nearly impossible." Eleanor nodded grimly. "What else?" "There have been 17 suspicious deaths connected to people who interfered with their operations. Accidents, suicides. Natural causes, nothing that could be proven, but the pattern is clear." Martinez looked around the command center again. "Mrs. Chen, these people don't just threaten, they eliminate problems. You and your granddaughter need to disappear until we can figure out a way to handle this through official channels. There are no official channels that can handle this. Ray, Victoria's organization has been operating for 20 years precisely because they're protected from official channels." Eleanor moved to the weapons case and selected a pistol with practiced ease. "Sometimes unofficial methods are the only option. You can't just start a war in my city. I didn't start this war. Victoria Carrington did when she threatened my granddaughter. I'm simply going to finish it." Martinez looked at Lily, who had been quietly listening to this exchange. "Miss Chen, you need to talk some sense into your grandmother. This isn't some movie. These people will kill you both without hesitation." Lily was quiet for a long moment, considering everything she'd learned over the past few days. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and determined. "Detective Martinez, my grandmother spent 30 years protecting this city from threats that you never knew existed. She's earned the right to protect her family using whatever methods she thinks are necessary." Martinez stared at both women, recognizing that he was facing a situation that his police training had never prepared him for. "What do you want from me?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I want you to stay out of our way. Whatever happens over the next few days, treat it as outside your jurisdiction. Some problems require solutions that can't be prosecuted in a court of law. And if innocent people get hurt? The only innocent people in this situation are my granddaughter and anyone else Victoria's organization might target. Everyone else made their choices when they decided to associate with criminals and killers. A new alert chimed from the communication station. Eleanor moved to check it, her expression growing dark as she read the incoming message. "What is it?" Lily asked. "Trevor Hutchins was found dead an hour ago. Apparent suicide. He jumped from the Morrison Bridge." The silence that followed was profound. Martinez was the first to speak. "You think Victoria killed him?" "I think Victoria eliminated a liability. Trevor was becoming unstable, drawing attention to her organization. She probably decided he was more dangerous alive than dead." Eleanor's voice was clinical, analytical. "It also sends a message to us, and to anyone else who might consider interfering with her operations." Lily felt sick. Whatever else Trevor had been, he was still a young man who'd made mistakes rather than committed crimes worthy of death. She murdered him just to make a point? She murdered him because dead witnesses can't testify, and because fear is a powerful tool for maintaining control. Eleanor turned to face both of them, her expression carrying the cold authority of command. "This is what we're dealing with, people who kill without hesitation or remorse, who view human life as nothing more than a resource to be managed." Martinez was shaking his head. "I can't be part of this. I can't just stand by while you plan to commit murder. You're not planning to commit murder, Detective. I am. And I'm not asking for your help, I'm asking for your absence." Eleanor's tone was final. "Go home to your family. Forget this conversation ever happened. And trust that when this is over, Portland will be safer than it was before." Martinez looked at both women one more time, then turned and walked back to the elevator without another word. When the doors closed behind him, Lily and Eleanor were alone with their plans and their dangerous equipment. "Are we really going to do this?" Lily asked quietly. Eleanor began checking weapons with the methodical precision of a professional. "Victoria Carrington has made it clear that negotiation isn't possible. She's demonstrated that she's willing to kill to protect her interests. And she's threatened my family, so we're going to kill her first. We're going to eliminate a threat to our safety and to this city. The methods are less important than the results." Eleanor looked up at her granddaughter with eyes that carried 50 years of experience with violence and its consequences. "This isn't about revenge, Lily. This is about survival." Lily nodded slowly, accepting the logic even as her conscience struggled with the implications. "What do we do first?" Eleanor's smile was predatory. "First, we gather intelligence on Victoria's operations and identify her vulnerabilities. Then we systematically destroy her organization until she has no choice but to flee Portland or die here. And if she chooses to flee?" Eleanor's expression grew cold. "Then we make sure she doesn't get very far." As they began planning their campaign against Victoria Carrington, Lily found herself thinking about Trevor Hutchins and the choices that had led to his death. She wondered if there had been a moment when he realized how far out of his depth he'd gotten, if he'd understood that his entitled behavior had led him into the orbit of people far more dangerous than he could imagine. But mostly, she found herself learning to think like her grandmother, systematically, ruthlessly, with the kind of tactical precision that separated professionals from amateurs. It was an education she'd never expected to receive, but one that might be the only thing standing between her family and the kind of people who killed college students to make a point. The war was about to begin, and Eleanor Chen intended to win it. By Monday evening, Eleanor had transformed the warehouse basement into a full operational command center. Maps covered every wall, marked with red pins indicating known locations of Victoria's organization, blue pins showing friendly resources, and yellow pins marking potential targets and vulnerabilities. Lily sat at the communication station, monitoring phone intercepts and internet traffic with equipment that she was fairly certain wasn't available to civilian law enforcement. Her crash course in surveillance techniques was progressing faster than either of them had expected. I've identified 3 properties in Portland that are connected to Victoria's organization, Eleanor announced, updating one of the wall maps. A gallery in the Pearl District that serves as her public front, a warehouse near the port that's listed as an art storage facility, and a private residence in the West Hills that's registered to one of her shell companies. What about the people who work for her? Eleanor moved to another map, this one showing organizational charts and relationship networks. She has at least 6 people in Portland that we can identify. 2 are muscle former military, probably hired for security and enforcement. 2 appear to be technical specialists, computers, communications, possibly forgery. 1 is a financial manager who handles the money laundering operations. And 1 is listed as a cultural attached to the Russian consulate, which means she's probably intelligence. Lily studied the photographs and dossiers Eleanor had somehow acquired. How did you get all this information? Old friends with access to databases that officially don't exist. Plus some creative research using resources that your tax dollars paid for, but that most citizens don't know about. Eleanor's expression was grim. The Russian connection is particularly concerning. If Victoria's organization has state sponsorship, they have access to resources we can't match. What kind of resources? Diplomatic immunity for key personnel. Access to embassy facilities that local law enforcement can't touch. Potentially, access to military-grade weapons and equipment. Eleanor paused at a photograph of a stern-looking woman in her 40s. This is Katerina Volkov, the supposed cultural attach. If she's really SVR Russian foreign intelligence, then we're not just dealing with criminals. We're dealing with professionals. Before Lily could respond, the communication system chimed with an incoming encrypted message. Eleanor read it quickly, her expression growing increasingly concerned. What is it? Bad news. Victoria's organization has been asking questions about our family. They've identified David's address, Jennifer's workplace, even the kids' school. Eleanor's voice was tight with controlled fury. They're expanding the threat to include the entire family. Lily felt ice forming in her stomach. Uncle James and Aunt Susan too? Unknown, but probably. This is a standard intimidation tactic. Identify all potential pressure points and make it clear that everyone is vulnerable. Eleanor was already moving to the weapons cabinet. We need to accelerate our timeline. I was hoping to gather more intelligence before acting, but they've forced our hand. What are we going to do? Eleanor began loading magazines with the efficient precision of someone who'd done it thousands of times. We're going to hit them first, hard and fast, before they can implement whatever plan they're developing. Hit them how? Their warehouse near the port. It's their operational center, where they store contraband and coordinate shipments. If we can destroy it and capture their records, we can cripple their Portland operations and gather enough evidence to bring down the entire network. Lily stared at the weapons Eleanor was preparing. This is really happening, isn't it? We're really going to attack a criminal organization. Yes, we are, and we're going to win. Eleanor met her granddaughter's eyes steadily. Lily, I need you to understand something. What we're about to do is illegal. It's dangerous. And it will change both of us forever. If you want to leave now, if you want me to arrange protection for you while I handle this alone. No. Lily's voice was firm. We're in this together. You said this was part of my education. Well, I want to learn. I want to be someone who can protect herself and her family. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then we begin tonight. But first, there are some things you need to know about close quarters combat and urban warfare. For the next 3 hours, Eleanor provided Lily with the most intensive and practical education in violence that any college student had ever received. How to move silently through buildings. How to use shadows and cover to avoid detection. How to disable opponents quickly and quietly. how to handle weapons designed for killing rather than sport. Most importantly, she taught Lily how to think like a predator rather than prey. Violence is just another tool, Eleanor explained as they practiced room-clearing techniques. Like any tool, it's most effective when applied with precision and intelligence. The goal isn't to be more brutal than your opponents, it's to be smarter, faster, and more prepared. How do you turn it off? The violence, I mean. How do you go back to being a normal person after doing what we're planning to do? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. You don't turn it off. You learn to live with it. You accept that some situations require solutions that normal people can't provide. And you remember that the alternative, allowing evil people to operate without consequences, is worse than the weight you carry afterward. As the evening wore on, Lily found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. Her movements became more fluid, more purposeful. Her awareness of her surroundings sharpened. Most significantly, the fear that had been eating at her for weeks was being replaced by something else. A cold, focused anger that felt surprisingly empowering. At 11 o'clock, Eleanor called a halt to the training. That's enough for tonight. We'll need to rest before tomorrow's operation. What exactly are we going to do tomorrow? Eleanor moved to the central table and spread out blueprints of the warehouse complex near the port. At 2 a.m., when the facility should be minimally staffed, we're going to conduct a reconnaissance in force. We'll enter the warehouse, gather intelligence on their operations, and if possible, capture one of their operatives for interrogation. What if something goes wrong? Eleanor's smile was predatory. Then we improvise. But Lily, I want you to understand something. Once we cross this line, there's no going back. We'll be committed to a course of action that ends with either Victoria's organization destroyed or us dead. Are you certain you're ready for that? Lily thought about Trevor Hutchins and his entitled assumption that he could take what he wanted without consequences. She thought about Victoria Carrington and her casual willingness to murder a young man to make a point. She thought about her parents and her younger cousins, all of whom were now potential targets because her grandmother had tried to protect her. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. Eleanor nodded once, sharply. Then get some sleep. Tomorrow we go to war. As they settled into the Spartan sleeping quarters Eleanor had prepared, Lily found herself staring at the ceiling and thinking about the person she'd been just a week ago. That Lily had been a college student worried about grades and social dynamics, someone who'd never imagined that her gentle grandmother harbored the skills and experience of a professional killer. Now, she was preparing to participate in what amounted to a military operation against people who wouldn't hesitate to torture and murder her entire family. The transformation should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt like awakening, as if she was finally becoming the person she was always meant to be. In the next room, Eleanor was also awake, running through contingency plans and equipment. Checks with the methodical thoroughness that had kept her alive through situations most people couldn't survive. Part of her mind was calculating angles of attack and escape routes, while another part was wondering what her husband would think of the choices she was making. But mostly, she was thinking about Lily and the education she was providing. Every skill she taught her granddaughter was another step away from the normal life they'd both built. Another commitment to a world where violence was a problem-solving tool and moral certainty was a luxury they couldn't afford. Still, when she thought about the alternatives, allowing Victoria's organization to operate freely, accepting that some people were above the law, Eleanor knew she was making the right choice. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the personal cost. Tomorrow, they would find out whether the skills she'd learned 50 years ago were still sharp enough to protect the people she loved, and whether her granddaughter had inherited enough of the family's darker talents to survive what was coming. The war was about to begin, and Eleanor Chen intended to end it on her own terms. We're approaching the climactic moments of this epic tale, and the tension is at its peak. Creating stories of this scope and detail requires not just writing talent, but careful plotting, character development, and attention to every narrative thread. We've journeyed through nearly 40,000 words together, and I hope every moment has kept you engaged. If this story has drawn you in and kept you listening, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Share this epic with anyone who loves immersive storytelling, and hit that notification bell for more incredible adventures. Now let's witness how everything comes together in these final, crucial moments. The Portland waterfront at 2 a.m. was a landscape of shadows and industrial silence. Cranes loomed like mechanical dinosaurs against the cloudy sky, and the constant murmur of the Columbia River provided a backdrop of white noise that would mask any sounds they might make. Eleanor and Lily moved through the maze of shipping containers with the fluid precision of a two-person tactical unit. Eleanor's training from 50 years ago had returned with startling clarity, while Lily displayed the kind of natural aptitude for covert movement that suggested genetics were more powerful than either of them had realized. "Target building is 200 meters ahead," Eleanor whispered into the throat microphone that connected them through encrypted radio. Two guards visible, one at the main entrance, one conducting a patrol circuit. They wore black tactical clothing that Eleanor had produced from the warehouse's seemingly inexhaustible supply of specialized equipment. Night vision goggles turned the dark waterfront into a green-tinted landscape of clearly defined shapes and movement patterns. Lily crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, her heart racing but her mind calm and focused. The fear that had dominated her life for weeks was gone, replaced by a cold determination that she found both frightening and exhilarating. "How do we get past the guards?" Eleanor's voice in her earpiece was calm and professional. "We don't go past them. We go through them. But quietly, we need to maintain the element of surprise for as long as possible." They separated Eleanor, moving to flank the patrolling guard while Lily took position near the main entrance. The coordination required no discussion somehow. They instinctively understood each other's movements and intentions. Eleanor reached her target first. The guard was a large man, probably former military, but he was walking a routine patrol in what he assumed was a secure area. He never saw the small, elderly woman who emerged from the shadows behind him. The technique Eleanor used was called a blood choke, pressure applied to the carotid arteries that cut off blood flow to the brain. Applied correctly, it rendered someone unconscious in seconds without causing permanent damage. Applied incorrectly, it killed. Eleanor applied it correctly, but just barely. The guard slumped to the ground silently, and Eleanor zip-tied his hands and feet before he could regain consciousness. "Guard one down," she whispered into her microphone. Lily watched the second guard through her night vision scope, timing his movements as he conducted what appeared to be a scheduled check of the warehouse's perimeter. When he passed behind a loading dock that blocked him from view of the building's interior, she moved. Unlike her grandmother, Lily had never rendered anyone unconscious before. But Eleanor's training had been thorough, and desperation made her precise. She approached the guard from behind and applied the same chokehold Eleanor had demonstrated, holding it until she felt him go limp. "Guard two down," she whispered, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. They regrouped at the warehouse's service entrance, where Eleanor quickly defeated the electronic lock with equipment that definitely wasn't available at the local DWARE store. The door opened silently, revealing a dark interior that their night vision rendered in clear detail. The warehouse was larger than it had appeared from outside, filled with wooden crates and shipping containers arranged in neat rows. But Eleanor's trained eye immediately identified the anomalies: crates that were too new, shipping labels that didn't match standard commercial formats, and a section of the building that was obviously more heavily secured than the rest. "This way," Eleanor whispered, leading them toward the secured area. They moved between the shipping containers like ghosts, pausing frequently to listen for any signs of additional guards or surveillance systems. The warehouse seemed largely automated, with most of its security focused on the perimeter rather than internal monitoring. The secured section proved to be an office complex built within the larger warehouse structure. Through reinforced glass windows, they could see computer workstations, filing cabinets, and what appeared to be a sophisticated communication center. Eleanor examined the door's locking mechanism with professional interest. "This is going to take a few minutes," she murmured, producing a set of tools that looked like they belonged in a spy movie. While Eleanor worked on the lock, Lily kept watch on their surroundings. The warehouse remained silent, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being observed. Something about the situation felt wrong, though she couldn't identify what was triggering her unease. "Got it," Eleanor announced quietly as the lock clicked open. They entered the office complex cautiously, immediately noting that the computers were still active and the communications equipment was monitoring multiple frequencies. Either someone had left in a hurry, or this facility was still actively occupied. "This is too easy," Lily whispered. "Why would they leave everything unlocked and unguarded?" Eleanor paused in her examination of the computer workstations, suddenly alert to the same wrongness that Lily had sensed. Her tactical instincts, dormant for 50 years but still sharp, were screaming warnings. "Because it's a trap," said a voice from the shadows behind them. They turned to find Victoria Carrington stepping into the office complex, flanked by two armed men who moved with the fluid precision of professional soldiers. She was dressed in black tactical clothing similar to their own, and her smile carried the cold satisfaction of a predator who had successfully lured prey into striking range. "Chun Wei Lin," Victoria said conversationally, as if they were meeting for tea rather than in the middle of a covert operation. "I was wondering when you'd make your move. Though I must admit, I'm surprised you brought your granddaughter along. That seems rather reckless." Eleanor's hand moved toward the pistol at her hip, but stopped when she saw the weapons trained on them by Victoria's men. At this range, any aggressive movement would result in immediate death. "How did you know we were coming?" Victoria's laugh was genuinely amused. "Did you really think you could operate in my city without me knowing about it? I've been monitoring your communications since yesterday, tracking your movements, watching your preparations." She gestured around the office complex. "This entire facility exists primarily as bait. We've been waiting for you to take the bait." Lily felt ice forming in her stomach as she realized how completely they'd been outmaneuvered. "You killed Trevor just to draw us out." Trevor was becoming a liability anyway. Using his death to manipulate you into revealing yourselves was simply efficient resource management. Victoria's expression grew more serious. "But I'm curious about something, Wei Lin. You've been retired for 50 years. Why come out of hiding now? Why risk everything for a simple harassment case?" Eleanor met Victoria's gaze steadily, recognizing that their captor was conducting an interrogation rather than simply planning their execution. That suggested they had some value alive, which meant there might still be options. "Family," Eleanor said simply. "You threatened my granddaughter. That made this personal. How touching, but also rather short-sighted. Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into? This isn't some simple criminal organization you can disrupt with spy movie tactics. We have resources, connections, protection at levels you can't imagine." Eleanor's mind was racing through possibilities, calculating angles and distances, assessing weapons and escape routes with the systematic thoroughness that had kept her alive through dozens of similar situations. But Victoria was right. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. "What do you want?" Eleanor asked. "Initially, I wanted you to disappear quietly. But you've proven too resourceful for that approach. Now I want information. Specifically, I want to know about your network, who you've contacted, what resources you have access to, which of your old colleagues might still be active, And if I don't cooperate? Victoria's smile turned predatory. Then your granddaughter dies slowly and painfully. While you watch. And then I'll move on to the rest of your family, your son, his wife, their children. I'll work my way through everyone you care about, until you decide that cooperation is preferable to watching your loved ones suffer. Lily felt terror clawing at her chest, but also something else, a cold rage that reminded her startlingly of her grandmother's predatory focus. You're insane if you think threatening children will make her cooperate. Am I? Victoria turned her attention to Lily with clinical interest. You're an interesting young woman. Most people in your situation would be begging for mercy by now. Instead, you're showing anger. Your grandmother's influence, I presume? My grandmother taught me that some people don't deserve mercy. Victoria laughed. Excellent. You'll make an interesting test case for some experimental interrogation techniques I've been wanting to try. The casual way she discussed torture sent ice through Eleanor's veins. But it also triggered something else, the cold, calculating fury that had once made her one of the most feared operatives in the Pacific Theater. Victoria had just made the same mistake that dozens of her previous opponents had made. She'd assumed that capture meant victory. Before you begin your interrogation, Eleanor said quietly, there's something you should know about the warehouse where you found us. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Oh? You assumed we were conducting a simple reconnaissance mission. You assumed. We came here looking for information. Eleanor's smile was coldly amused. You were wrong. Something in her tone made Victoria's eyes narrow. What do you mean? I mean that we didn't come here to gather intelligence. We came here to destroy your operations. And the devices we planted throughout this facility are going to explode in APPROXIMATELY. Eleanor glanced at her watch with calm precision. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The silence that followed was profound. Victoria stared at Eleanor with a mixture of disbelief and growing alarm, while her two guards shifted nervously. You're bluffing. Am I? Eleanor's expression remained pleasantly neutral. Tell me, Victoria, in your research about Chen Wei-Lin, did you learn about my specialty during the war? Victoria's face had gone pale. Explosives, she whispered. Among other things. I spent 2 years in the Philippines, teaching resistance fighters how to destroy Japanese supply depots and ammunition dumps. The techniques haven't changed much. In 50 years, Eleanor's smile widened. Though the explosives have become considerably more sophisticated. One of Victoria's guards moved toward the exit, but she stopped him with a sharp gesture. How do I know you're not lying? You don't. But consider this, we knew you were monitoring our communications. We knew this was likely a trap. Did you really think we'd walk in here without contingency plans? Victoria was clearly calculating risks, trying to determine whether Eleanor was bluffing, or if they were all sitting in what amounted to a massive bomb. What do you want? I want you to leave Portland. Tonight, take your organization and disappear, and never threaten my family again. That's not possible. We have too much invested in this operation. Then you're going to die here, Eleanor said matter-of-factly. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. The sound of an explosion in the distance made everyone freeze. It was muffled by the warehouse walls, but clearly audible and clearly not part of the normal nighttime sounds of the waterfront. That was the Port Authority Communications Center, Eleanor explained calmly. Just a small demonstration to show that I'm not bluffing. The main charges are considerably larger. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Where are the bombs? Distributed throughout the support structures of this building. When they detonate, the entire facility will collapse. The fire department will find evidence of a gas leak and accidental explosion. Very tragic, but these old industrial buildings are notoriously unsafe. Disarm them. I'm afraid that's not possible. Once activated, they can only be stopped by a signal from a dead man switch. Eleanor held up her left hand, showing a small device strapped to her wrist. If my heart stops beating, or if this device is removed, the bombs detonate immediately. Victoria's guards were looking increasingly nervous, and one of them was already moving toward the exit, despite her orders to stay. The psychological pressure of potentially being trapped in a building rigged to explode was breaking their discipline. "You're both going to die too," Victoria pointed out. "Yes, probably. But my granddaughter will live, and my family will be safe. Sometimes that's the best outcome you can achieve." Lily stared at her grandmother with a mixture of awe and terror. Eleanor was calmly discussing their mutual destruction as if it were a reasonable business proposition. "Grandma," Lily whispered, "please tell me you actually planted those bombs." Eleanor's smile was enigmatic. 2 minutes and 10 seconds to find out. The second explosion was closer, and this time they could feel the vibration through the warehouse floor. Emergency sirens were beginning to wail in the distance, and the sound of running footsteps outside suggested that Victoria's security perimeter was collapsing. "This is insane," one of Victoria's guards said, his professional composure finally breaking. "We need to get out of here." Victoria whirled on him with fury. "Stay where you are." But the man was already moving toward the exit, and his partner was following. The prospect of being caught in a building collapse had overridden their training and loyalty. Victoria found herself facing Eleanor and Lily alone. Her weapon still trained on them, but her position significantly weakened. "You're bluffing." "You have to be bluffing." 1 minute and 30 seconds, Eleanor said conversationally. "Though I should mention that the charges are on a variable timer. The actual detonation could occur anywhere within a 10-minute window. Keeps people from making precise calculations about escape times." The uncertainty was the final straw. Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked completely, and for the first time since this confrontation began, she looked genuinely afraid. "What do you want?" she demanded. "I told you, leave Portland tonight. Take whatever you can carry and disappear. Never come back and never threaten my family again. And if I agree?" Eleanor reached into her pocket and produced a small radio transmitter. "Then I send the disarm signal, and we all walk away from this alive." Victoria stared at the device, clearly trying to determine whether it was real or an elaborate bluff. The distant sound of more explosions, whether real or staged, she couldn't tell, was making decision-making increasingly difficult. I know you won't just kill me anyway. Because dead enemies can't spread the word about what happens to people who threaten my family. I want you alive, Victoria. I want you to tell everyone in your network exactly what happened here tonight. I want them to know that Chen Wei-Lin is still active and that Portland is under my protection." The psychological warfare was masterful. Eleanor was offering Victoria a way to save face while surrendering. She could leave Portland not as a defeated enemy, but as someone who'd encountered a force too dangerous to challenge. 50 seconds, Eleanor announced, Victoria's resolve finally cracked. "Do it. Send the signal." Eleanor pressed a button on the transmitter, and the device emitted a brief electronic tone. In the silence that followed, everyone held their breath, waiting to see if they were about to die in a spectacular explosion. Nothing happened. Victoria sagged with relief, then looked at Eleanor with a mixture of respect and fear. "Were there actually bombs?" Eleanor's smile was enigmatic. "That information is classified. But I will say this, if you ever threaten my family again, you'll find out for certain." As Victoria and her remaining guards left the warehouse, Eleanor and Lily waited in the office complex until they were certain they were alone. Only then did Lily turn to her grandmother with the question that had been burning in her mind. Were there really bombs? Eleanor reached into her other pocket and produced what appeared to be a small recording device. "No, but there were enough pre-recorded explosion sounds to make it convincing. Plus some strategically placed smoke generators that I activated remotely. So you were bluffing the whole time?" I was conducting a psychological warfare operation. The goal wasn't to actually blow up the building. It was to convince Victoria that I was capable of doing so. Eleanor's expression grew serious. Sometimes the threat of violence is more effective than violence itself. As they made their way out of the warehouse, Lily found herself marveling at her grandmother's tactical thinking. Eleanor had turned their capture into victory through nothing more than careful preparation and masterful psychological manipulation. What happens now? Now we wait and see if Victoria keeps her word. If she leaves Portland quietly, then our problems are solved. If she doesn't, Eleanor's expression grew cold. Then I'll have to implement some of the more permanent solutions I've been holding in reserve. They drove through the empty streets of Portland in comfortable silence, both processing what they'd experienced and accomplished. The waterfront was alive with emergency vehicles responding to the explosions, and Eleanor allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction at the chaos she'd created with nothing more than sound effects and smoke machines. "Grandma," Lily said as they approached the warehouse that served as their base, "I need to ask you something important." "Of course." "Tonight, when you were facing Victoria and her guards, when you were talking about dying to protect the family, you meant it, didn't you? You really would have died to keep me safe." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer that question honestly. "Yes," she said finally, without hesitation. "That's what love means," Lily being willing to sacrifice everything for the people who matter most. "And you taught me to be the same way. I taught you to be strong, to be capable, to never accept being a victim." Eleanor glanced at her granddaughter with pride and concern. "But I also hope I taught you that violence should always be a last resort, used only when all other options have been exhausted. What if it isn't enough? What if Victoria doesn't leave?" Eleanor's smile was predatory. "Then she'll discover that Chen Wei-Lin has been retired for 50 years, but she's never been gone. And some skills never really fade. They just wait in the darkness until they're needed again." As they pulled into the warehouse, both women were thinking about the person Lily had become over the past week. The frightened college student who'd been terrorized by Trevor Hutchins was gone, replaced by someone who could face armed criminals with calm determination. But they were also thinking about the person Eleanor had revealed herself to be not. The gentle grandmother who'd raised 3 children and spent 30 years in public service. But the lethal operative who'd once been considered too dangerous for official records. The next few days would determine whether Victoria Carrington was smart enough to recognize when she'd been outmaneuvered, or foolish enough to continue a conflict she couldn't win. Either way, Eleanor Chen was ready for whatever came next. Some wars ended with negotiation and compromise. Others ended with the complete destruction of one side or the other. As she secured the warehouse and prepared for whatever Victoria's response might be, Eleanor found herself hoping for the former while preparing for the latter. The grandmother who'd spent the morning in her garden was gone forever. In her place stood Jin Wei-Lin, and she was very much looking forward to finishing what Victoria Carrington had started. 3 days later, Eleanor Chen walked into Murphy's bar wearing a floral cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses, looking every inch the harmless elderly woman that 90% of Portland believed her to be. But the 10% who knew better, the criminals, the corrupt officials, the people who operated in the shadows between legal and illegal, they had been spreading whispers about what had happened at the waterfront. Victoria Carrington had indeed left Portland, but not quietly. Her organization's hasty departure had left a power vacuum that other criminal enterprises were already moving to fill. More importantly, word was spreading through the underground networks about the elderly woman who'd outmaneuvered a professional intelligence operative using nothing but psychological warfare and sound effects. Eleanor took a seat at the bar and ordered tea, her presence causing a subtle shift in the atmosphere that only the most observant patrons would notice. Conversations became quieter. People instinctively checked their surroundings, and several individuals made quick exits without finishing their drinks. The bartender, a nervous young man who'd only worked at Murphy's for 6 months, served her tea with hands that shook slightly. He'd heard the stories about what had happened to Big Mike Torino, the bar's former bouncer who'd made the mistake of threatening this particular customer's granddaughter. "Quiet evening," Eleanor observed conversationally. "Yes, ma'am, very quiet." Eleanor sipped her tea and surveyed the room with the casual attention of someone people watching rather than conducting surveillance. But her trained eye was cataloging faces, noting who was present and who was conspicuously absent, identifying the handful of individuals who were trying very hard not to look in her direction, dotted a corner table. 2 men in expensive suits were conducting what appeared to be a business meeting. Eleanor recognized one of them as Marcus Petrov, heir to a shipping fortune and former associate of Trevor Hutchins. The other was unfamiliar, but his bearing and the deference Petrov was showing suggested he was someone important in Portland's criminal hierarchy. Eleanor rose from her seat at the bar and walked over to their table with the unhurried pace of someone making a social call. Both men looked up as she approached, and she saw recognition and fear flash across Petrov's face. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Eleanor said politely. "I wonder if I might have a word." The unknown man gestured to an empty chair with the cautious courtesy of someone who'd learned to be wary of elderly Asian women who appeared harmless. "Please, join us." Eleanor sat down and folded her hands in her lap, her posture suggesting a grandmother about to discuss a church bake sale rather than someone who'd recently declared war on an international criminal organization. "I wanted to thank you for your assistance the other night," she said to Petrov, who looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Your friend Trevor Hutchins was becoming quite a problem for my granddaughter. His unfortunate death resolved that situation, though I suspect it wasn't entirely voluntary on his part." Eleanor's tone remained conversational, but there was something beneath it that made both men shift uncomfortably. "Trevor's death was ruled a suicide," Petrov said carefully. "Yes, I'm sure it was. These things often are, when the right people want them to be." Eleanor turned her attention to the unknown man. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Eleanor Chen." "James Morrison." He said it like the name should carry weight, and Eleanor realized she was speaking to the owner of Morrison's restaurant and several other high-end establishments that catered to Portland's elite. "How interesting. Your restaurant was quite lovely the other night, though I'm afraid our evening was cut short by some unpleasant business associates of young Mr. Petrov here." Morrison's expression grew wary. "What kind of business associates?" "The kind who thought they could operate in Portland without paying proper respect to the existing power structures." Eleanor's smile was grandmotherly, but her eyes were predatory. "I trust that situation has been resolved to everyone's satisfaction." The 2 men exchanged glances, clearly trying to determine what Eleanor knew and what she wanted. Morrison was the first to speak. "We heard that there was some disagreement involving foreign interests and local operations. But that matter appears to have been settled." "Indeed it has. Victoria Carrington proved to be a reasonable woman once the situation was properly explained to her." Eleanor paused to sip her tea. "I trust that any future business arrangements will take into account the importance of maintaining stability in our community." The message was clear. Eleanor knew about their criminal activities, knew about their connections to Victoria's organization, and was establishing herself as a power that needed to be consulted before any major changes to Portland's criminal landscape. Petrov found his voice. "Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, I'm not sure what you think we can do to help with community stability." Eleanor's expression grew more serious. "Mr. Petrov, your family's shipping interests handle a significant percentage of the cargo that moves through Portland's port facilities. Mr. Morrison's establishments serve as meeting places for Portland's business and political elite. You're both in positions to know when outside interests are attempting to establish operations in our city. And you want us to what? Report to you? I want you to remember that Portland has been a stable, prosperous city precisely because certain people have worked very hard to maintain that stability. When outside interests threaten that stability, when they target innocent college students or conduct unauthorized operations in our territory, that creates problems for everyone. Morrison leaned forward slightly. What exactly are you proposing? Eleanor's smile returned. I'm proposing that we maintain the status quo. You gentlemen continue your legitimate business operations. You avoid any association with individuals or organizations that might threaten the safety of Portland's citizens. And in return, you continue to enjoy the protection and stability that has made this city so profitable for your enterprises. And if we refuse? Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in the air around their table grew colder. Then you might find yourselves dealing with the same kind of problems that Victoria Carrington experienced. Though I suspect you're both far too intelligent to make that choice. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Both men understood that they were being offered a choice between cooperation and conflict, and that Eleanor Chen possessed resources they couldn't match. I think we understand each other, Morrison said finally. Excellent. Eleanor finished her tea and rose from the table. It's been a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Petrov, please give my regards to your father. As she walked back toward the bar, every conversation in Murphy's had stopped. The other patrons were watching this elderly woman, who'd just conducted what appeared to be a negotiation with two of Portland's most connected criminals, and they were trying to understand what they'd witnessed, and Eleanor paid for her tea and left a generous tip, then walked toward the exit with the same unhurried pace she'd maintained throughout the evening. But as she reached the door, she paused and turned back to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, she said in a voice that carried clearly through this suddenly silent bar, I want you all to know that Portland has always been my home, and I intend to keep it safe for the people I love. That includes all of you, your families, and your businesses. As long as everyone remembers to treat each other with respect and consideration, we'll continue to enjoy the peace and prosperity that makes this such a wonderful place to live. The message was aimed at everyone in the room, but especially at the handful of individuals who operated in Portland's gray areas, the small-time criminals, the corrupt officials, the people who bent rules for profit, but usually avoided serious violence. However, Eleanor continued, her tone remaining pleasant but carrying an undertone that made several people reach instinctively for weapons they weren't carrying. Anyone who threatens innocent people, who targets children or families, who brings outside violence into our community, well, they'll discover that Portland has protections they don't expect and resources they can't anticipate. She smiled warmly at the room full of stunned faces. Have a lovely evening, everyone. And remember, this is our city. Let's all work together to keep it that way. Eleanor walked out of Murphy's bar and into the Portland night, leaving behind a room full of people who were frantically trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. Within hours, word would spread throughout the city's underground networks about the elderly woman who'd publicly claimed protection of Portland, and backed it up with threats that everyone believed she could carry out. By morning, Eleanor Chen would be established as a power broker in Portland's criminal hierarchy, not through violence or intimidation, but through the careful application of psychological warfare and the growing legend of Chen Wei-Lin. As she drove home to the quiet suburban house where her granddaughter was waiting, Eleanor reflected on the choices she'd made and their consequences. The peaceful retirement she'd built so carefully was gone forever, replaced by a role she'd never wanted, but had proven incapable of avoiding. But Lily was safe, her family was protected, and Portland was a little bit more secure than it had been. Before Victoria Carrington made the mistake of threatening an innocent college student, some prices were worth paying, even when the cost was higher than anyone should have to bear. 6 months later, Eleanor Chen stood in her garden on a crisp autumn morning, her hands gentle as she prepared the flower beds for winter. To any casual observer, she looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a retired librarian enjoying her golden years in comfortable suburban anonymity. But the phone in her pocket buzzed, regularly with encrypted messages from people who needed the kind of help that couldn't be obtained through official channels. Portland's police had noticed a dramatic decrease in violent crime, particularly crimes involving young women and family disputes. What they didn't know was that certain problems were being resolved through intervention methods that never appeared in official reports. Lily emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, her movements carrying the fluid grace of someone who'd spent months training in hand-to-hand combat and tactical planning. She was still a college student, still pursuing her degree in economics, but she was also something else now, someone who could protect herself and others from threats that most people couldn't handle. "Any interesting calls this morning?" Lily asked, settling into the patio chair beside her grandmother. "3, actually. A young woman in southeast Portland whose ex-boyfriend won't accept that their relationship is over. A family in Beaverton whose teenage daughter is being stalked by someone claiming to be a modeling agent. And a rather interesting situation involving some newcomers to the drug trade who apparently haven't learned about Portland's community standards." Lily sipped her coffee and considered this information. "What's our response timeline?" The casual way she said "our" would have shocked anyone who'd known her before Trevor Hutchins entered their lives. But Eleanor had been right about the education she'd provided once learned. Certain skills became part of who you were rather than something you did. The stalking situations can be handled through conventional warnings and surveillance. The drug dealers ... Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "That might require a more direct approach. They've been recruiting middle school children, which violates several community agreements that were established after Victoria left town." In the months since Victoria Carrington's organization had been driven from Portland, Eleanor had become an unofficial mediator between the city's various criminal enterprises and legitimate authorities. She didn't control the criminal activity that would have been both impossible and counterproductive, but she did enforce certain standards of behavior. No targeting of children or families, no recruitment of minors, no violence against civilians, no operations that brought unwanted federal attention to the city. It was a system that worked because everyone understood that Eleanor Chen had resources that made enforcement both possible and terrifying. "How do you want to handle the drug dealers?" Eleanor finished her coffee and rose from her chair with the deliberate movements of someone whose arthritis was a constant companion. "I think it's time for you to take the lead on this one. Consider it a graduation exercise." Lily felt a familiar thrill of anticipation mixed with nervousness. Over the past 6 months, she'd participated in dozens of operations, but always as Eleanor's assistant and student. This would be the first time she'd be responsible for planning and executing a solution independently. What are the parameters? Standard community protection protocols. They stop recruiting children. They relocate their operations outside the metropolitan area, or they discover that Portland can be a very dangerous place for people who threaten young people. Eleanor's smile was warm, but her eyes were cold. Your choice of methods, your choice of resources. But remember, the goal is always to protect innocent people, not to punish wrongdoers. Punishment is just a tool we use when protection requires it. As they walked back toward the house, Eleanor's phone buzzed with another encrypted message. She read it quickly, her expression growing concerned. "What is it?" "Detective Martinez wants to meet. Says he has information about some federal agents who've been asking questions about Chin Wei Lin." Eleanor's voice carried a note of worry that Lily rarely heard. "It appears that our activities may have attracted some unwanted attention." They spent the rest of the morning reviewing security protocols and contingency plans. If federal law enforcement was investigating Eleanor's activities, It could mean the end of everything they'd built. Worse, it could mean that Eleanor's past was finally catching up with her. The meeting with Martinez was scheduled for early afternoon at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland that catered to the kind of clientele who minded their own business and forgot faces quickly. Eleanor arrived first, settling into a corner booth with clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. Martinez appeared 20 minutes later, looking like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. He slid into the booth across from Eleanor with the wary caution of someone who was having second thoughts about the meeting. "Mrs. Chen, we need to talk about your recent activities." "I'm not sure what you mean, Detective." "I've been gardening and volunteering at the library, the same as always." Martinez's expression was skeptical. "Come on, the entire criminal underground in Portland is talking about you. Word is that you've established yourself as some kind of unofficial crime boss, mediating disputes and enforcing your own version of justice." Eleanor sipped her coffee with studied calm. "People gossip, Ray, especially when they don't understand what they're observing. 3 drug dealers disappeared last week. 2 men who were running a prostitution ring left town suddenly after someone convinced them that Portland wasn't healthy for their business. A gun dealer who was selling to teenagers closed up shop and moved to Seattle." Martinez leaned forward. "That's not gossip, Mrs. Chen. That's a pattern." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth Martinez could handle. He'd been a good friend over the years, and she owed him honesty. But she also couldn't afford to compromise the network she'd built. "Ray, what do you know about the crime statistics in Portland over the past 6 months? I know they're down across the board. Violent crime, property crime, drug-related offenses, everything's dropped significantly. And do you know why?" Martinez was silent, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was heading. "It's because certain problems are being solved before they escalate to the point where they require police intervention," Eleanor continued. "It's because the people who prey on innocent citizens are being discouraged from operating in our city. By vigilantes, by people who think they're above the law." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "By people who understand that sometimes the law isn't sufficient to protect the innocent." "Ray, in your 15 years as a police officer, how many cases have you seen where you knew someone was guilty but couldn't prove it? How many times have you watched dangerous people walk free because of technicalities or political connections?" "That's not the point. That's exactly the point. The law is a tool, Ray. A very important tool, but not the only one. Sometimes protecting people requires methods that can't be prosecuted in a courtroom." Martinez was quiet for a long time, clearly struggling with the implications of what Eleanor was telling him. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with resignation. "The federal agents who've been asking questions, they're not just interested in Chen Wei-lin. They're interested in a broader pattern of vigilante activity across the Pacific Northwest. Someone in Washington thinks there's an organized network of people taking justice into their own hands." Eleanor felt ice forming in her chest. What kind of federal agents? FBI mostly. But also some people who wouldn't identify their agency. The kind of people who make local cops nervous just by showing up. The implications were clear. If Eleanor's activities had attracted federal attention, it was only a matter of time before they connected Chen Wei-lin to Eleanor Chen. And if that happened, everything she'd built, the protection network, the criminal mediation system, the safety of her family would be destroyed. What do they want? They want Chen Wei-lin. They want to know if she's really alive, and if so, where she is and what she's doing. Martinez met her eyes steadily. "Mrs. Chen, I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you care for your family, contribute to this community, help people who had nowhere else to turn. Whatever you were before, whatever you might be doing now, I believe you're trying to protect people. Thank you for that. But I also can't protect you from federal investigation." If they decide you're Chun Wei Lin, if they decide to pursue you seriously, there won't be anything local law enforcement can do to help. Eleanor nodded grimly. She'd always known this was a possibility, had always prepared for the day when her past might catch up with her present. But she'd hoped it wouldn't happen so soon, before she'd had time to establish enough political protection to make federal prosecution inconvenient. How much time do I have? I don't know. Could be weeks, could be months. But Mrs. Chun, if you are who I think you are, if you've been doing what I think you've been doing, maybe it's time to consider retirement. Again. Eleanor finished her coffee and left money on the table, her mind already racing through contingency plans and exit strategies. Ray, I want you to remember something. Whatever happens in the next few weeks, whatever you might learn about my past or my present, the work we've been doing in this city has made it safer for everyone. Your wife, your children, everyone's families, they're all safer because certain problems have been prevented from escalating. I'll remember, as Eleanor left the coffee shop, she was already composing the encrypted messages that would activate her network's emergency protocols. If federal law enforcement was closing in, she needed to secure her resources, protect her associates, and ensure that the protection system she'd built could continue operating without her direct involvement. Most importantly, she needed to make sure that Lily was prepared to take over operations if Eleanor was forced to disappear again. Walking back to her car, Eleanor Chen looked like nothing more than a grandmother running afternoon errands. But in her mind, she was already Chun Wei Lin again, calculating probabilities and preparing for a conflict that would determine whether the life she'd built in Portland could survive the ghosts of her past. Some wars never really ended. They just went dormant for a while, waiting for the right moment to resume. It appeared that moment was approaching faster than she'd hoped. But Eleanor Chen had been fighting wars longer than most people had been alive. And she intended to win. This one too. Regardless of the personal cost, the federal agents hunting Chun Wei Lin were about to discover that some legends were based on very real and very dangerous truths, and that 73-year-old grandmothers could be the most terrifying opponents they'd ever faced. Creating a story of this magnitude requires months of planning, writing, and careful narration to ensure every detail is perfect and every moment keeps you engaged. This has been the equivalent of a complete novella, crafted specifically for this format. If this epic story moved you, inspired you, or simply entertained you through this incredible journey, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more amazing long-form stories. Share this with anyone who loves compelling narratives and has the patience for truly epic storytelling. Hit that notification bell to be the first to hear our newest content. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community and for joining me on this remarkable adventure. I'll see you in the next incredible tale.